The first thing Claire Bennett noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that came after a long meeting or an empty office floor. This one felt different. Heavy. Permanent. She stood in front of the mirrored headquarters of Hawthorne Financial with nothing more than a cardboard box tucked against her chest. Inside were a framed photo of her parents, a coffee mug that read, "Keep going," 2 notebooks filled with financial projections, and the small cactus she'd somehow managed to keep alive for 3 years. The revolving glass doors spun behind her as employees hurried past, pretending not to notice. Claire wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly she felt numb. 3 hours earlier, she'd walked into work expecting another ordinary Monday. Instead, she'd been escorted into human resources. The explanation had been wrapped in polished corporate language. Department restructuring. Position eliminated. Business necessity. She knew better. 2 weeks ago, she'd uncovered evidence that senior executives had been hiding losses from investors. She'd reported everything exactly as company policy required. The next morning, people stopped making eye contact. Meetings disappeared from her calendar. Projects she'd spent months building were quietly handed to someone else. Now she was unemployed. Because she'd done the right thing. Claire looked up at the towering glass building one last time. So this is how honesty gets rewarded. She laughed once. It sounded hollow. Her phone buzzed. Her best friend Emma. Claire stared at the screen before answering. "Hey, you sound awful. I got fired." There was silence. Then, "They actually did it? They didn't even try to hide it." Emma sighed. "I told you they would protect the executives before protecting you." "I know." "So, what now?" Claire looked toward the parking garage. "I honestly don't know." She had savings. Enough for a few months. Maybe longer if she sold her apartment. But that wasn't what frightened her. It was starting over again. 5 years earlier, she'd been planning a wedding. Daniel Brooks had seemed perfect. Successful. Ambitious. Confident. Until she discovered he'd been secretly using her financial models to impress investors while carrying on an affair with another executive. The engagement ended. The promotion disappeared. The trust she'd spent years building vanished overnight. She'd rebuilt herself once already. Now life expected her to do it again. Nearly 800 miles away. The Walker Ranch had seen better days. The land stretched across rolling hills that had belonged to Ethan Walker's family for nearly 90 years. Normally, this time of year, the fields would shimmer beneath the morning sun. Instead, the grass looked tired. The creek barely moved. Dust lifted with every passing breeze. Ethan leaned against a weathered fence studying another envelope from the bank. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it said. Past due. Final notice. Immediate action required. He folded it carefully before slipping it into his shirt pocket. Behind him, cattle wandered slowly across the pasture. Too many had already been sold. The ones remaining represented everything he still refused to lose. A pickup truck rolled up the dirt road. Samuel Harris climbed out carrying 2 coffee cups. "I figured you'd be out here." "I usually am." Samuel handed him one. "Another letter." Ethan nodded. "The 3rd this month." Samuel looked across the property. "You've still got good land. Good land doesn't pay overdue loans. You thinking about selling?" "Noko, you didn't even hesitate." "My father built this place. So did his father." And one day, Ethan stopped speaking. Samuel understood. One day it was supposed to belong to Ethan's daughter. Instead, there might not be anything left to inherit. "You know, the developer called me again." "I figured he would." "They're offering more this time." Ethan shook his head. "They don't want a ranch. They want a resort." Samuel didn't argue. Everyone knew it. The developers saw lakeside property, luxury cabins, golf courses, weekend homes. Not history, not family, certainly not memories. Ethan watched several cows gather beneath the old oak tree. Grace loved that tree. She'd insisted they hang a swing from one of its branches. Every summer she'd sit there reading while Lily played nearby. Now, the swing moved gently in the breeze. Empty, just like most of the house. The farmhouse still smelled faintly of cinnamon. Grace had baked constantly. Bread, pies, cookies, anything that made the house feel warm. Even after 3 years, sometimes expected to hear her humming in the kitchen. Instead, only quiet. He stepped inside and paused beside the fireplace. A framed photograph rested on the mantel. Grace smiled back at him exactly as she always had. Bright green eyes, long blonde hair, that familiar smile capable of calming every storm. Morning. He said it automatically, like he always did. I'll figure something out. His voice caught. I promise. Promises had become dangerous things. He'd promised Grace he'd keep the ranch alive. He'd promised Lily she'd always have a home. He wasn't sure he could keep either. 3 days later, Claire sat inside a small coffee shop scanning job listings. Nothing fit. Positions she'd once qualified for now required relocation. Others paid half her previous salary. Several belonged to companies she'd never trust. Her laptop chimed. New email. From a law office. Subject opportunity regarding agricultural partnership program. Claire frowned. She almost deleted it. Instead, curiosity won. The message explained that an attorney representing a struggling family ranch was seeking someone with financial expertise willing to enter a temporary legal marriage. Claire blinked. She read the paragraph again. Temporary marriage. She nearly laughed out loud. There had to be a catch. She kept reading. Under a little-known agricultural recovery program, certain family-owned ranches qualified for debt restructuring if ownership remained within a legally recognized family household meeting updated residency and management requirements. The arrangement included compensation, shared financial benefits, clearly defined legal protections. Either party could dissolve the marriage after 1 year. No expectation beyond maintaining the ranch. Claire leaned back. This has to be fake. She researched the law. To her surprise, it existed. Rare. Unusual. Perfectly legal. She closed the laptop. Still ridiculous. Yet, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had financial knowledge. No permanent ties. Nothing keeping her in the city. And perhaps, helping save a family ranch sounded more meaningful than returning to another glass office filled with people willing to destroy careers for quarterly profits. Her phone rang. The caller ID displayed the attorney's office. Claire hesitated, then answered. Miss Bennett? Speaking. My name is Richard Lawson. I received your email. I'm glad. I assume you have questions. I have hundreds. Richard chuckled softly. That's understandable. There is one thing I'd like to make clear. The gentleman involved isn't looking for romance. Neither am I. He simply refuses to lose land that's been in his family for generations. Claire stared through the cafe window. Cars moved endlessly through downtown traffic. People rushed from one meeting to another, everyone chasing something. She suddenly wondered what it would feel like to wake up somewhere peaceful. To build something real, instead of spreadsheets no one appreciated. Richard continued. If you're willing, I'd like to arrange a meeting. Claire closed her eyes. Every logical part of her brain screamed no. Every exhausted part whispered. Why not? I'll meet him. That same afternoon, Richard Lawson drove across Walker Ranch carrying a leather briefcase. Ethan greeted him outside the barn. You came. I did. Good news. Richard hesitated. I found someone willing to meet. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Seriously? She's a financial consultant. Recently unemployed. Highly recommended. And she actually agreed. Only to a conversation. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. This whole thing still sounds crazy. Richard smiled. It does. But it might save your ranch. Ethan looked across the fields. A gentle breeze moved through the dry grass. Maybe, just maybe, do. This impossible idea was the only chance he had left. He wasn't looking for another wife. No one could replace Grace. He certainly wasn't looking for love. This would simply be an agreement, a business arrangement, nothing more. Or at least, that's what both of them believed. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Claire's position, would you marry a complete stranger to save a family ranch? Let me know your answer in the comments, because this story only gets more complicated from here. Claire Bennett barely slept the night before the meeting. She'd replayed the attorney's email at least a dozen times, trying to convince herself that agreeing to a conversation didn't mean agreeing to anything else. Still, every time she imagined walking away, another thought followed. What exactly was waiting for her back in the city? Another corporate office. Another boss willing to sacrifice employees for profits. Another carefully polished life that could disappear in a single afternoon. She sighed as she looked out the hotel window. The city skyline had already begun to fade behind miles of open countryside. For the first time in years, she didn't know where her future pointed. Richard Lawson's office occupied an old brick building in the small farming town of Ashton Creek. It felt nothing like the sleek law firms Claire was used to. Wooden floors creaked beneath her shoes. Family photographs decorated the walls. Fresh coffee filled the waiting room. It almost felt comfortable. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes. Mr. Lawson will be with you in just a moment." Claire nodded. Her palms felt surprisingly warm. Why was she nervous? This wasn't a date. It wasn't even close. It was simply a business meeting. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. The office door opened. "Miss Bennett." Richard Lawson extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me." He motioned toward his office. "Mr. Walker is already here." Claire took one slow breath, then stepped inside. Ethan Walker stood when she entered. He looked taller than she'd expected. Broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, simple blue flannel shirt, jeans, work boots that had clearly seen years of ranch life. There wasn't a hint of corporate polish about him. And somehow, that immediately made him seem more honest. He removed his cowboy hat. "Miss Bennett." "Mr. Walker." Their handshake lasted barely 2 seconds, firm, respectful, carefully distant. Neither smiled very much. Richard gestured toward the chairs. "Please." Everyone sat. Silence settled across the room. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I suppose the easiest place to begin is complete honesty." Claire appreciated that. "So would I." Richard looked toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll be straightforward. My ranch is close to foreclosure. I've fought it for 3 years. Drought. Low cattle prices. Medical bills after my wife became sick." He stopped. The room became very quiet. Claire didn't interrupt. After a few seconds, Ethan continued. "I've refinanced twice, sold equipment, sold livestock, cut every expense I could. It's still not enough." Claire listened carefully. No exaggeration, no self-pity, just facts. Richard slid several folders across the table. Claire opened them. Income statements, property assessments, loan balances, tax records. She spent several minutes reading. The numbers weren't good, but they also weren't hopeless. There were unnecessary loan structures, poor refinancing decisions made years earlier, missed agricultural grants, several government incentives that had never been applied for. Claire slowly looked up. "Who handles your finances?" "I do." She almost smiled. "I figured." Ethan looked embarrassed. "I know cattle. I know crops. I don't know paperwork." Claire nodded. "I can tell." For the first time, the corner of Ethan's mouth lifted slightly, the smallest smile. Gone almost immediately. But it was there. Richard opened another folder. "Now I'd like to explain why you're both sitting here." He laid out several legal documents. The Agricultural Family Preservation Program allows qualifying ranches to receive emergency restructuring assistance. Claire scanned the pages. I've already read about it. Richard nodded. Then you know one of the eligibility requirements. Claire looked toward Ethan. A legally recognized family household actively managing the ranch. Correct. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I hate asking anyone to do this. Claire met his eyes. I imagine you do. He gave a quiet nod. I've spent months saying no. I finally realized pride wasn't paying the bills. Claire understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. Richard leaned back. The agreement would last 1 year. Claire looked down at the paperwork. No hidden conditions. No. No expectation of a traditional marriage. No. Separate bedrooms. If that's your preference. It is. Richard nodded. Separate finances. Absolutely. Claire continued reading. Either party may terminate after 12 months. Correct. No financial penalties. Correct. Everything appeared surprisingly reasonable. Almost too reasonable. She looked toward Ethan. I need to ask something. Go ahead. Why not find someone locally? Ethan answered honestly. I tried. People talk. They assume things. Some thought I was trying to replace Grace. He looked down briefly. I wasn't. Claire noticed the way he said his late wife's name. There was still love there. Deep love. Not obsession. Just grief that had settled into everyday life. She respected that. Richard excused himself to answer a phone call. The office door closed behind him. Claire and Ethan were suddenly alone. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Claire broke the silence. I've never done anything remotely like this. Ethan laughed quietly. I certainly hope not. She laughed too. The tension eased just a little. He leaned back. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you even considering this? Claire stared out the office window. I lost my job. I'm sorry. I exposed financial fraud. They fired me. Ethan frowned. They fired the honest person. Apparently honesty isn't profitable. He shook his head. That doesn't seem right. No, it doesn't. Another silence. Not awkward this time. Comfortable. Ethan finally said, I don't want someone pretending to care about this place. Claire looked around the office. I'm not pretending. I don't know anything about ranching, but I know numbers. And she hesitated. I know what it's like to lose something you built. Ethan studied her for a moment. He believed her. Richard returned carrying fresh coffee. I hope I didn't interrupt. No? We were talking. Good. He smiled. That's encouraging. Over the next 2 hours, they discussed everything. Living arrangements, legal responsibilities, property ownership, insurance, medical decisions, privacy, household expenses. Nothing was ignored. Nothing was assumed. Claire appreciated that. This wasn't two desperate strangers making reckless choices. It was two adults trying to solve impossible problems. Before leaving, Richard placed 2 copies of the agreement on the desk. You don't need to decide today. Claire stood. I'd like to visit the ranch first. Ethan looked relieved. I think that's fair. If you're going to live there, you should know what you're agreeing to. An hour later, Claire followed Ethan's pickup truck down a long gravel road. The city disappeared completely. Fields stretched toward distant hills. Wind moved through tall grass. Old wooden fences lined the road. Finally, the Walker Ranch appeared. It wasn't perfect. The paint on the barn had faded. Several fences leaned. The farmhouse clearly needed repairs. But it felt alive, honest, real. Ethan parked. Claire stepped out. The air smelled different. Fresh hay, earth, pine trees. Nothing artificial. No traffic. No sirens. Only birds and the distant sound of cattle. It's beautiful. Ethan looked surprised. Really? You don't see all the repairs it needs. I do. But I also see what it could become. He looked at the ranch the way someone looked at an old friend. I've almost forgotten. Forgotten what? What it looked like before all I could see were bills. Claire smiled gently. Sometimes someone from the outside notices things we stop seeing. They walked slowly across the property. Ethan explained everything: the cattle operation, the wheat fields, the old equipment, the irrigation problems, the barn built by his grandfather, the oak tree planted by his father. Claire listened carefully. Every building had a story. Every fence carried history. She finally understood. He wasn't trying to save land. He was trying to save generations. They reached the farmhouse porch. A faded rocking chair faced the valley. It was Grace's. Claire nodded quietly. You don't have to explain. I wanted you to know. I'm not looking for someone to replace her. I know. She genuinely meant it. As they stood on the porch, a strong breeze rolled across the fields. Claire watched sunlight move across the hills. It felt strangely peaceful. Something inside her, something exhausted for years, began to settle. Back in town that evening, Claire sat alone in her hotel room. The unsigned agreement rested on the desk. She stared at it for nearly an hour. Every logical reason told her not to do this. People didn't marry strangers. People didn't move across the country to save ranches. People certainly didn't gamble their futures on impossible legal arrangements. Then she thought about Ethan. About the ranch. About the honesty in his eyes. About how he'd spoken of Grace with respect instead of trying to hide his grief. About how he'd never once exaggerated his situation or pressured her. For the first time since losing her job, she felt something unexpected. Purpose. The next morning, she walked into Richard Lawson's office carrying the agreement. Ethan was already there. He stood as she entered. Claire placed the signed document on the desk. I'll do it. Ethan stared at her for several seconds. You've thought this through, as much as anyone can think through something this unusual. You understand this changes your life. She smiled softly. My life already changed. I'm simply choosing what happens next. Ethan slowly nodded. Then, he extended his hand. Thank you. Claire shook it. Let's save your ranch. Neither of them noticed Richard smiling quietly from across the room. Because while the paperwork described it as a marriage of convenience, life had a habit of rewriting even the most carefully written contracts. Claire Bennett had always believed she was adaptable. She had survived corporate politics. She had rebuilt her career after a broken engagement. She had started over more than once. By the time the wedding day arrived, she was convinced moving onto a ranch would simply be another adjustment. She was wrong. The ceremony lasted less than 20 minutes. The small country chapel sat on the edge of Ashton Creek, surrounded by tall oak trees and quiet fields. Only a handful of people attended. Richard Lawson stood proudly near the front. Samuel Harris occupied the first pew. Martha Dawson smiled warmly from the opposite side. There were no photographers, no orchestra, no elaborate decorations, no reception hall waiting afterward. Claire wore a simple ivory dress she had purchased only 3 days earlier. Elegant, modest, practical. Ethan wore his best dark suit, though it was obvious he felt far more comfortable in flannel and boots. When the minister asked them to exchange vows, both spoke clearly. Neither pretended this was a fairy tale. Neither made promises they couldn't honestly keep. I do. I do. 2 simple words. 1 legal signature. 1 unusual agreement. When the minister announced them husband and wife, polite applause filled the little chapel. Claire glanced toward Ethan. He offered a respectful smile. Nothing more. Exactly as they had agreed. Outside the chapel, Samuel approached Ethan first. I'm proud of you. I'm just trying to keep the ranch. I know. Samuel looked toward Claire. And I think you've found someone willing to fight beside you. Claire smiled politely. I'll do everything I can. Martha wrapped Claire in a warm hug before Claire could react. Welcome to Ashton Creek. Claire laughed softly. I've only been here a few days. You're family now. The words caught Claire completely off guard. Family. She couldn't remember the last time someone had used that word so naturally. There was no honeymoon. Instead, Ethan drove them back to Walker Ranch in his aging pickup truck. Claire followed in her own car, carrying the few belongings she had decided to bring. Everything else remained packed inside a storage unit in the city, just in case. She reminded herself this arrangement lasted only 1 year. 1 year, then both of them would move on. Simple. At least. That was the plan. The farmhouse looked different now, not because anything had changed, because now it was home, or something close to it. Claire carried 2 suitcases inside. Ethan followed with several boxes. I cleared out the guest room. You didn't have to. It seemed appropriate. She smiled. Thank you. He opened the bedroom door. The room overlooked the eastern pasture. Morning sunlight filled it beautifully. The furniture was old but carefully maintained. A handmade quilt rested neatly across the bed. My grandmother made that. It's beautiful. She'd probably be happy someone was using it. Claire set her suitcase beside the dresser. It feels peaceful. It usually is. He hesitated. If you need anything, I'll ask. Another awkward silence. Eventually Ethan nodded. I'll let you unpack. The door closed quietly behind him. Claire sat on the edge of the bed. It didn't feel strange. Not exactly. Just different. Her first morning began before sunrise. Not because she wanted it to. Because Ethan had already been outside for nearly an hour. She woke to the distant sound of an engine. Curious, she pulled back the curtains. The eastern sky glowed orange. Across the fields, Ethan drove a tractor through the morning mist. She checked the clock. 5:15. You've got to be kidding. Breakfast smelled incredible. Fresh coffee, eggs, toast, bacon. Claire entered the kitchen wearing jeans, boots, and a brand new plaid shirt she'd purchased specifically for ranch life. Ethan looked up from the stove. Morning. You've been awake forever. I usually start around 4:30. The Claire blinked. 4:30. So's don't sleep in. She laughed. I suppose they don't. He placed a plate in front of her. You'll need the energy. The Claire immediately became suspicious. That sentence worries me. A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. It chilled. After breakfast, the tour officially began. Claire already knew where everything was. Now she needed to learn what everything actually did. This is the equipment barn. She looked around. Massive tractors, hay balers, feed mixers, trailers, machinery she'd only ever seen in movies. I recognize exactly. She paused. None of this. Ethan chuckled. We'll start with easier things. I'm relieved. Their first task seemed simple. Collect eggs. Claire confidently carried a basket toward the chicken coop. How difficult can this be? 5 minutes later, she knew. Very difficult. One particularly protective hen chased her halfway across the yard. Claire ran while trying not to drop the basket. Ethan. He leaned against the fence, laughing harder than she had seen yet. I thought you said they were harmless. They usually are. This one hates me. It probably senses you're nervous. I am nervous. Eventually Ethan stepped in, calmly guiding the angry hen away. Claire finally caught her breath. I'm being bullied by a chicken. He couldn't stop laughing. I wish you'd warned me. I honestly didn't think she'd chase you. Claire looked toward the coop. We're not friends. The next challenge involved feeding cattle. Claire confidently lifted a heavy grain bucket. It barely moved. She tried again. Nothing. Ethan quietly walked over. It's easier if you carry half. I knew that. You definitely didn't. I absolutely didn't. He divided the feed between 2 smaller buckets. There. Now you're thinking like a rancher. I've been here 6 hours. We all start somewhere. Later that morning, Claire attempted opening a pasture gate. She pulled. Nothing pushed. Still nothing. She examined the latch. Still confused, Ethan watched for almost a minute before finally speaking. Lift first. She lifted. The gate opened immediately. Claire stared at it. That gate has personally offended me. It does that. To everyone? No. Mostly newcomers. She narrowed her eyes at the innocent-looking gate. I don't trust it. By lunchtime, Claire's boots were muddy. Her shirt carried hay. There was dirt on one cheek. Her hair refused to stay tied back. She looked nothing like the polished financial consultant who had walked out of a skyscraper only a week earlier. Oddly enough, she didn't mind. They ate sandwiches beneath the old oak tree, the same tree Ethan had pointed out earlier. The wooden swing moved gently beside them. Claire looked toward it. It belonged to Grace. Ethan nodded. She loved sitting there after work. The Claire waited. He continued quietly. She believed every problem looked smaller after watching one sunset. The Claire smiled softly. She sounds wise. She usually was. Neither spoke for a while. The silence didn't feel uncomfortable, just respectful. That afternoon, Claire insisted on helping stack hay bales. She managed exactly 3. The 4th shifted unexpectedly. Claire lost her balance and promptly landed in a pile of loose hay. She lay there staring at the barn ceiling. I quit. Ethan walked over. You've been a rancher for 1 day. I've decided retirement suits me. He offered his hand. She accepted. As he pulled her upright, loose hay covered nearly every inch of her clothes. He reached over and brushed a strand from her shoulder. Their eyes met for barely a second. Both immediately stepped back. Neither mentioned it. Later, Claire discovered ranch bookkeeping. Finally, something familiar. She spread receipts across the dining room table. Equipment maintenance, fuel costs, veterinary bills, feed expenses, crop income. She frowned. Ethan. He looked up from repairing a saddle. Yeah. Did you know you've been paying 2 different insurance companies for the same equipment? He blinked. What? You've been double insured. Since when? Claire checked the paperwork. Almost 18 months. He stared. I had no idea. She smiled. You do now. Can that be fixed? It absolutely can. How much? Claire did several quick calculations. Enough to make your next loan payment. Ethan looked genuinely stunned. You found that in 20 minutes. I've only started. For the first time, hope appeared on his face, real hope. Not forced optimism. Actual possibility. Over the next several days, Claire settled into a rhythm. Mornings began before sunrise. Coffee became essential. She slowly learned the names of the cattle, which tools belonged where, how to recognize healthy crops, how to drive the small utility vehicle. She still couldn't operate the tractor. Ethan wisely refused. Maybe next month. I'll take that as progress. It is. The townspeople noticed the changes. When Claire visited the general store with Ethan, conversation stopped briefly. Not out of judgment, out of curiosity. Then Martha Dawson walked across the store and hugged Claire. Ladies. She called to everyone nearby. I'd like you all to properly meet our newest neighbor. One by one, people introduced themselves. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, store owners. No one asked awkward questions. No one treated her like an outsider. Instead, they welcomed her, as though she'd lived there for years. Driving back to the ranch, Claire looked out the truck window. Your town is different. In what way? People actually know each other. They do. They help each other. They have to. She smiled quietly. I've missed that. That evening Claire sat alone on the farmhouse porch. The sun disappeared behind the distant hills. Crickets filled the warm evening air. The ranch looked almost peaceful enough to forget its financial troubles. Ethan stepped outside carrying 2 mugs. Coffee. I was hoping. He handed her one. Neither spoke immediately. Sometimes, there simply wasn't anything that needed saying. Finally, Ethan looked toward the fields. You know, what? I haven't laughed this much in years. Claire looked at him. You laughed at me? I know. But I laughed. She couldn't help smiling. I suppose that's progress. It is. The silence returned, comfortable this time. Neither of them realized it yet, but somewhere between angry chickens, stubborn gates, mud-covered boots, and stacks of forgotten insurance paperwork, their carefully constructed emotional walls had begun to crack. Very slowly, almost invisibly. But they were cracking all the same. The routine settled in faster than either of them expected. Claire no longer needed 3 alarms to wake up before sunrise. She still wasn't happy about it, but she no longer complained quite as much. Well, not out loud. Most mornings began the same way. Coffee, breakfast, a quick review of the day's work. Then Ethan disappeared outside while Claire alternated between helping around the ranch and untangling years of neglected financial records. The arrangement worked. It was practical. Efficient. Safe. Safe was important. Neither of them wanted complicated emotions. Not after everything they had already lost. One chilly morning, Claire stood on the porch holding a steaming mug of coffee. Fog drifted across the lower fields, wrapping the ranch in a soft blanket of gray. She watched Ethan repairing a section of fence nearly 200 yards away. He worked with quiet confidence. Every movement seemed natural, measured, patient. There wasn't a wasted step. She realized something. He rarely rushed. Even when there was too much work, even when bills continued arriving, he simply kept going. There was something strangely calming about that. Ethan looked toward the house and noticed her watching. He raised one hand. Claire waved back. A simple gesture, nothing more. Yet somehow, it made the enormous ranch feel a little smaller. Later that morning, Claire transformed the dining room table into what Ethan jokingly called mission control. Folders, invoices, receipts, loan documents, insurance papers, government forms, legal notices, color-coded sticky notes covered nearly every available surface. Ethan walked in carrying a toolbox. He stopped. I think my paperwork just multiplied. The Claire didn't even look up. It did. I can't even see the table. You weren't using it correctly. He laughed. I've been eating there for 10 years. Exactly. She slid a folder toward him. Sign here. What is it? A refund request. For what? You've been paying unnecessary penalties because one form was never updated. He stared at her. How much? Just over $12,000. He blinked. 12,000? Claire nodded. You've basically been donating money to paperwork. He slowly sat down. I suddenly feel personally attacked. You should. He signed the document without another question. I'm starting to think marrying a financial consultant was the smartest business decision I've ever made. The Claire smiled. It probably was. The words slipped out so naturally that neither of them realized what had just happened. For the first time, they had joked about their marriage. Not the agreement. Not the paperwork. The marriage. That afternoon, Ethan invited Claire to ride along while checking irrigation pumps. She climbed into the aging pickup truck, carefully brushing dirt from her jeans. I'm finally getting used to this dust. You've stopped sneezing every 5 minutes. Progress. He started the engine. The truck rumbled across the property. Fields stretched endlessly around them. Claire leaned her elbow against the open window. This place feels different every day. In a good way. Yes. The first day I only saw work. And now, she watched the breeze moving through the wheat. I see possibility. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Neither had used that word in a long time. Possibility. It sounded hopeful. They stopped beside one of the irrigation pumps. Ethan climbed out. Claire followed. He knelt beside the old machine. This thing's older than I am. It still works. Most days. That's encouraging. He laughed. Barely. As Ethan worked beneath the metal housing, Claire wandered a few steps away. She noticed a weathered wooden bench beneath a large oak tree. A small metal plate rested against the backrest. She brushed away years of dust. For Grace, every sunset was worth watching. Claire read it twice. She didn't say anything. When Ethan finished repairing the pump, he found her standing quietly beside the bench. "You found it." "I wasn't looking." He walked over slowly. "I built this after she passed." Claire looked toward him. "It's beautiful. We used to come here after finishing chores. Every evening." She gently ran her fingers across the weathered wood. "You must miss her." He nodded. "Every day." There was no dramatic pause. No tears. Just simple truth. Claire respected that more than any emotional speech. Driving home, neither spoke for several miles. Eventually, Ethan broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Course. What happened to your fiancé?" Claire looked out the passenger window. She hadn't expected that question. She wasn't sure anyone in Ashton Creek even knew she'd once been engaged. She considered avoiding the answer. Instead, she surprised herself. Had cheated. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "I'm sorry." "So was I." She laughed quietly. "At first." "What changed?" "I realized I wasn't grieving him. I was grieving the future I'd imagined." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand that." Claire continued. "Daniel wasn't just my fiancé. He was my business partner. He used my work to build his career. When I discovered the affair..." She shrugged. "I lost both. The relationship, and the future I'd planned." Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "That must have been difficult." "It was. I stopped trusting people after that." She smiled sadly. "I suppose that's why this arrangement seemed easier. No expectations. No chance of disappointment." Ethan glanced toward her. "I guess we had the same idea." That evening, Claire cooked dinner. Or at least, she attempted to. 30 minutes later, smoke drifted through the kitchen. The smoke detector screamed loudly. Ethan rushed inside. "What happened?" The Claire stood frozen, holding a frying pan. "I may have underestimated bacon." He looked at the blackened pan. "You murdered breakfast." It was supposed to become dinner. He opened several windows while trying not to laugh. "I've never seen bacon that color." It had ambition. It certainly did. Claire folded her arms. "You can stop laughing anytime." "I really can't." Eventually, both of them were laughing. Hard enough that neither noticed Martha pulling into the driveway. She knocked gently before entering. "I smelled smoke halfway down the road." Claire sighed dramatically. "It was an accident." Martha looked at the ruined pan. "I see." Ethan couldn't stop smiling. Martha looked between them, then smiled knowingly. "What?" Claire asked. "Nothing. You've both laughed more tonight than I've seen Ethan laugh in 3 years." The room suddenly became quiet. Ethan looked away. Claire changed the subject. "So, we're ordering pizza." Martha nodded immediately. "Absolutely." A few days later, rain finally arrived. Not enough to erase the drought, but enough to delay outdoor work. Claire spent most of the afternoon inside organizing the office. While searching for empty filing folders, she opened a cabinet she hadn't noticed before. Inside, neatly stacked photo albums. She hesitated. Curiosity won. The first album showed Ethan and Grace on their wedding day. Another captured family vacations, harvest celebrations, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. Grace sitting beneath the old oak tree reading a novel. Grace teaching Ethan how to decorate cookies. Grace laughing while throwing hay at Samuel. Every picture radiated happiness. Claire quietly closed the album. She shouldn't have opened it. As she returned it to the shelf, Ethan entered the room. He immediately noticed. "You found the albums." "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize." "I wasn't snooping." "I know." He stepped closer. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan gently picked up the top album. She hated having her picture taken. The Claire smiled. She looked happy. She was. "You loved her very much." "I still do." Claire nodded. "I can see that." There wasn't jealousy. There couldn't be. Their marriage wasn't built on romance. Still, a tiny voice deep inside whispered something uncomfortable. Would there ever be room in Ethan's heart for anyone else? She immediately pushed the thought away. That wasn't why she was here. The following morning, Claire received an email from a recruiter in Chicago. An executive financial position. Excellent salary. Luxury apartment. Signing bonus. The kind of offer she'd once dreamed about. She stared at the screen, then quietly closed the laptop without replying. When Ethan walked into the office a few minutes later, he noticed. Everything okay? Claire looked up. Just another job offer. Good one? Very. You should take it. She blinked. What? If it's what you want. The Claire studied him. There wasn't the slightest trace of selfishness. No attempt to convince her to stay. No guilt. He genuinely wanted what was best for her. Even if that meant leaving. She smiled softly. I already turned it down. Ethan looked surprised. You didn't even think about it. I did. For about 30 seconds. Why? The Claire looked around the farmhouse. At the paperwork spread across the desk. The muddy boots beside the door. The quiet view of the fields through the window. Then she answered honestly. Because for the first time in years, my work actually matters. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he simply smiled. A small one. Quiet. Grateful. Outside. The rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long golden beams across the ranch. Neither of them realized it, but the walls around their hearts were beginning to let a little light in. Claire Bennett had been living at Walker Ranch for almost 2 months. Long enough to know which floorboards creaked. Long enough to recognize the sound of Ethan's pickup before it reached the driveway. Long enough to stop checking her phone every few minutes. Life had become simpler. Not easier. The ranch still struggled financially. Bills still arrived. Repairs never seemed to end. But something inside Claire had changed. For the first time in years. She wasn't living from deadline to deadline. She was living from sunrise to sunset. Saturday mornings were different. Work still had to be done. Animals didn't understand weekends. But Ethan usually finished the most urgent chores before breakfast. Claire found him repairing a wooden gate near the barn. You've been out here since 4 again, haven't you? He looked up with a grin. 4:20. I appreciate that you consider those 20 minutes meaningful. They are. I disagree. Laughed. I know. Claire handed him a fresh cup of coffee. I figured you might need this. I definitely do. He accepted it with a grateful smile. You're starting to remember the important parts of ranch life. The coffee. The coffee. They stood quietly for a moment, watching the early morning fog drift across the fields. Claire realized she had stopped counting the days until the contract ended. She hadn't meant to. It had simply stopped mattering. After breakfast, a small yellow school bus pulled into the ranch driveway. Claire looked toward Ethan. I thought school was closed today. It is? He smiled. Lily's coming home for the weekend. The Claire blinked. You never mentioned she was staying with your sister. I guess I didn't. My sister's family lives about 40 minutes away. Lily spends most school weeks with them. Claire nodded slowly. It makes things easier. I couldn't always give her enough attention during planting and harvest. I understand. She wasn't sure she actually did, but she respected the decision. The bus stopped. A small figure jumped down carrying a bright blue backpack. Before Claire could take another step, Lily ran straight toward Ethan. Dad? Ethan smiled in a way Claire had never seen before. Completely. Without hesitation. He knelt as Lily threw her arms around his neck. I missed you. I missed you too. Claire quietly looked away for a moment. Some moments deserve privacy. After another hug, Ethan stood. Lily does. I'd like you to meet someone. The little girl turned toward Claire. This is Claire. Claire smiled warmly. Lily studied her carefully. Children had a remarkable ability to notice things adults ignored. Finally, she smiled. So you're the lady who fixed Daddy's paperwork. Claire laughed. I suppose that's one way to describe me. Dade says you saved lots of money. I'm trying. Lily nodded with complete seriousness. Good, because this place belongs to Grandpa. Claire glanced toward Ethan. He looked quietly emotional. The little girl wasn't thinking about business. She was thinking about home. The weekend settled into an entirely new rhythm. Claire quickly discovered that children viewed ranch life very differently than adults. Every fence became an adventure. Every chicken had a personality. Every cow apparently deserved a name. Claire watched Lily feed several calves. Do they all actually have names? Lily looked horrified. Of course. She pointed proudly. That's Daisy. That's Biscuit. That's Marshmallow. Claire looked toward Ethan. You let this happen. I lost that battle years ago. You mean every cow has a name? Most of them. Claire smiled. I suddenly understand why selling cattle is difficult. It is. Later that afternoon, Claire found Lily sitting beneath the old oak tree drawing pictures in a sketchbook. What are you working on? Lily turned the page proudly. Our family. Claire smiled. The drawing showed Ethan, Lily, the farmhouse, several cows, one extremely oversized dog that didn't actually exist. Claire laughed softly. I like the dog. I wish we had one. So do I. Then Claire noticed something. There was another person standing beside Ethan. Long brown hair. Plaid shirt. Claire looked back at Lily. Who's this? Lily answered without hesitation. You. Claire's heart skipped. I thought. She paused carefully. I thought this was your family. Lily looked confused. It is. Claire wasn't sure what to say. Children often accepted things adults complicated. To Lily, Claire already belonged. That evening, Claire prepared dinner, with Martha's cooking lessons. Her skills had improved dramatically. Nothing burned, which already counted as success. Lily climbed onto a kitchen stool. Can I help? Absolutely. What should I do? Claire handed her vegetables to wash. You are officially in charge of carrots. Lily saluted dramatically. Yes, chef. Ethan walked in carrying fresh bread. He stopped in the doorway. Claire and Lily were laughing over something involving cooked carrots and talking vegetables. For just a second, his chest tightened. The kitchen looked full again. Warm. Alive. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed hearing laughter in this room. Dinner felt surprisingly natural. Conversation bounced easily between them. School stories, ranch stories, embarrassing moments involving chickens. Claire discovered Lily inherited Ethan's dry sense of humor. Did Dad tell you he got chased by a goose once? Ethan immediately objected. We agreed never to discuss that. I don't remember agreeing. Claire leaned forward. I'm very interested. Lily grinned. The goose won. Claire laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Ethan sighed dramatically. I was outnumbered. You absolutely were. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs to unpack. Claire helped Ethan wash dishes. He quietly handed her another plate. Thank you. For what? For being kind to her. Claire looked surprised. She's easy to like. Still, I appreciate it. Claire dried another plate. I was nervous. Really, I wasn't sure she'd like me. Ethan smiled. I think she decided that 5 minutes after meeting you. Claire looked toward the stairs. I hope she never feels like I'm trying to replace anyone. Ethan stopped washing dishes. She won't. Claire looked at him. Because neither of us is asking that. She nodded slowly. I know. The silence that followed felt thoughtful. Comfortable. The next morning, Claire sat at the dining room table reviewing ranch accounts. Lily wandered in wearing oversized pajamas. What are you doing? Trying to save the ranch. Oh. Lily climbed into the chair beside her. Can I help? Claire smiled. Do you know anything about accounting? No. Then maybe you can help in another way. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper. Would you like to make a list of things we need to buy next month? Lily nodded enthusiastically. Claire expected toys. Candy. Books. Instead, Lily wrote chicken feed, fence paint, garden seeds. Claire stared at the list. You think about the ranch a lot. Lily shrugged. Dad worries. I don't like when he worries. Claire gently squeezed her shoulder. Neither do I. Later. Claire spent the afternoon reorganizing the ranch office. Old filing cabinets became neatly labeled. Invoices were sorted by month. Loan documents were separated by category. She even built a digital spreadsheet tracking every expense. Ethan walked inside carrying muddy boots. He stopped. What happened in here? I declared war on paperwork. I can see that. You've been keeping receipts in cookie tins. They're organized. They're hidden. He looked around. Everything suddenly made sense. For years, he'd been reacting to financial problems. Claire was preventing them. That difference could save everything. Near sunset, Samuel stopped by unexpectedly. He walked into the office and immediately noticed the changes. I'll be honest, he looked around. I've never seen this room look so professional. Claire smiled. There's still plenty to do. Samuel nodded toward Ethan. I told you bringing her here would change things. Ethan quietly answered. It already has. Claire pretended not to hear, but she did. That evening, the three of them sat together on the farmhouse porch. Lily rested against Ethan's shoulder while watching fireflies appear across the fields. Claire sat quietly beside them. No one spoke for several minutes. Eventually Lily yawned, then looked up at Claire. Will you still be here next weekend? Claire froze. The question sounded so simple, so innocent. She glanced toward Ethan. He looked equally uncertain. Neither wanted to remind Lily about the agreement. Claire finally smiled. I hope so. Lily seemed satisfied. She rested her head against Ethan again. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep. Ethan carefully carried her inside. Claire remained on the porch alone. She watched the stars slowly appear above the ranch. The contract had always felt temporary, simple, businesslike. Now, it suddenly seemed connected to something much larger. Not legal documents, not financial rescue, people, relationships, belonging. When Ethan returned, he quietly sat beside her. She likes you. Claire smiled faintly. I like her too. They neither said anything else. The night breeze moved gently across the fields. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The ranch settled into peaceful silence. Claire looked toward the softly glowing farmhouse windows, for reasons she couldn't quite explain. It no longer felt like a place she was staying. It was beginning to feel like a place she was coming home to. And that realization scared her far more than any financial risk ever had. For nearly 3 weeks, things felt almost normal. Almost. The ranch had settled into a rhythm that made every day feel purposeful. Claire spent mornings helping Ethan with chores before retreating to the farmhouse office where mountains of paperwork slowly disappeared beneath neatly organized folders and spreadsheets. Ethan repaired fences, checked irrigation systems, rotated grazing fields, maintained equipment that seemed determined to break every few days. Lily visited every weekend, filling the house with laughter that lingered long after she returned to her aunt's home. For the first time in years, Walker Ranch felt alive, which was exactly when life decided to remind them that happiness rarely arrived without a fight. Claire noticed the envelope before Ethan did. It rested inside the mailbox with the unmistakable logo of First Prairie Agricultural Bank. Certified delivery. She felt her stomach tighten. Those were never good. She carried the envelope into the kitchen. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, wiping grease from his hands with an old shop towel. Morning. Morning. She held up the envelope. It came. The smile disappeared from his face. He didn't need to ask which letter. He already knew. He slowly opened it. Read the first page. Then the second. Finally, he folded everything neatly before placing it back inside. Claire watched quietly. What does it say? He exhaled. They're accelerating the repayment schedule. She frowned. I don't understand. The bank reviewed the latest valuation. They've decided the ranch now represents a higher recovery value if they foreclose sooner. Claire stared at him. So, because the ranch has become financially healthier, they're demanding money faster. He nodded. That's one way of looking at it. Claire shook her head. That's absurd. It happens. She took the letter from him and read every line carefully. The numbers were brutal. The payment due within 60 days exceeded anything the ranch could comfortably produce. Unless. She walked into the office, opened her laptop, started typing. Ethan followed. What are you doing? Looking for another way. There isn't one. There usually is. You just haven't found it yet. 3 hours later, Claire still hadn't moved. Agricultural grants, state recovery funds, low interest restructuring loans, conservation programs, emergency drought assistance, every possibility, every application, every deadline. She built a checklist across an entire whiteboard. Ethan stood in the doorway. I've never seen anyone attack paperwork. Claire didn't even glance up. I refuse to lose to paperwork. He smiled. You make forms sound dangerous. They are. She circled another program. There. What? This ranch qualifies. I've never heard of that. You wouldn't. The application is 74 pages. He blinked. 74. Claire nodded confidently. I've completed worse. He slowly backed toward the kitchen. I'll leave you to whatever this is. She smiled without looking away from the screen. Smart decision. The following afternoon, a sleek black luxury SUV rolled into the ranch driveway. Claire noticed it first. Are we expecting someone? Ethan looked through the window. His expression darkened immediately. No. The SUV stopped beside the barn. A sharply dressed man stepped out wearing polished boots that had clearly never touched mud, expensive sunglasses, tailored jacket, perfect haircut. Confidence practically radiated from him. Claire whispered, He looks like he belongs on Wall Street. Ethan answered quietly, He does. The man smiled broadly as he approached. Ethan Walker, I've been hoping we'd finally meet. Ethan remained where he was. What can I do for you? The stranger extended his hand. Victor Caldwell. Caldwell Land Development. Ethan didn't shake it. I know who you are. Victor lowered his hand without appearing offended. Good. That saves time. Claire stepped onto the porch beside Ethan. Victor looked toward her. You must be Claire. I've heard impressive things. Claire answered politely. I'm sorry. I can't say the same. Victor laughed. I like honesty. Then I'll return the favor. He looked back toward Ethan. I'm here to make another offer. I already gave you my answer. You gave me last month's answer. This is a better offer. It still isn't for sale. Victor slowly removed a folder from his briefcase. You should at least hear the numbers. I don't need to. Victor opened the folder anyway. This property sits on nearly 1,200 acres. Beautiful lake frontage. Rolling hills. The perfect location for a luxury resort. The Claire watched Ethan carefully. His jaw tightened. Victor continued. I'm prepared to pay well above market value. You'll never have another financial worry. You can retire. Travel. Start over somewhere new. Ethan quietly replied. This isn't just land. Victor smiled patiently. It always is. No. Ethan pointed across the fields. My grandfather planted those oak trees. My father built that barn. My wife is buried beneath that hill. Victor stopped talking. The silence lasted several seconds. Finally, he closed the folder. I understand this is emotional. No. Ethan answered calmly. You don't. Victor looked toward Claire. Perhaps you can convince him. Claire met his gaze. I won't. You know the finances. I do. Then you know my offer makes sense. Claire nodded slowly. Financially. Wes! But not morally. Victor's smile faded. Morality doesn't pay bills. Claire folded her arms. Sometimes it protects the things worth paying for. Victor stared at her, then quietly returned the folder to his briefcase. I'll give you 2 weeks. You'll change your minds. Without another word, he climbed back into the SUV. The vehicle disappeared in a cloud of dust. Neither Claire nor Ethan spoke until it was completely out of sight. Finally, Claire turned toward Ethan. Was that the first time he's come here? Nuke. Third, he always arrives dressed like he's inspecting a shopping mall. Claire looked across the ranch. He's waiting? For what? For us to become desperate. Ethan nodded. He thinks everyone has a price. Claire looked directly at him. Do you? He didn't answer immediately. Then, no. Good. Good, because neither do I. That evening, dinner was unusually quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Claire kept replaying Victor's visit. She understood the mathematics. The offer probably exceeded anything the ranch could earn over the next decade. From a purely financial perspective, selling almost made sense. Almost. Then she remembered the bench beside the irrigation pond, the swing beneath the oak tree, Grace's photograph, Lily's drawing, generations. Home. Some things simply couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. The next morning, Claire called Richard Lawson. I need a favor. What happened? She explained the bank's letter, Victor Caldwell's visit, the accelerated repayment demand. Richard listened carefully. Finally, he spoke. I've been expecting this. You have. Caldwell has been buying ranches all across the county. He's patient. He waits until families become desperate. Then he makes generous offers. Claire frowned. Can the bank legally pressure Ethan like this? They're operating within the contract. But there may be room to negotiate. Claire immediately opened another notebook. What do you need from me? Updated financial projections. Cash flow analysis. Proof that the ranch is improving. Claire smiled. I already have all of it. Richard laughed. I suspected you might. Over the next several days, the farmhouse became mission headquarters. Claire built financial forecasts stretching 5 years into the future. She calculated projected crop yields, livestock values, equipment depreciation, loan restructuring scenarios, even tourism opportunities that could create additional income during slower farming seasons. Ethan watched in amazement. You've thought about all of this. I've thought about everything. When do you sleep? I'll answer after this deadline. He smiled. I don't think that's an answer. It isn't. Then Saturday arrived. Lily came home again. She immediately noticed the serious mood inside the farmhouse. Is everything okay? Claire smiled reassuringly. We're just working on grown-up problems. Lily thought for a moment. Money. Claire looked surprised. How did you know? Dad gets quieter. Oh. And you organize more papers. Claire laughed softly. I do, don't I? Lily nodded confidently. When things get scary, you make lists. Claire stared at the little girl. It was true. She always made lists, even as a child. Somehow, Lily had noticed. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Claire found Ethan sitting alone on the porch. He wasn't drinking coffee. He wasn't reading paperwork. He simply stared across the dark fields. She quietly sat beside him. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Ethan sighed. I'm tired. Claire looked toward him. Physically, he shook his head. No. I'm tired of wondering whether every season will be the one that finally breaks us. Claire listened. I'm tired of pretending everything's under control. I'm tired of calculating which bill can wait another week. He looked out toward the barns. Some days, I feel like I'm failing everyone. Claire gently placed one hand over his. He looked down, then back at her. You aren't. It feels that way. I know. She squeezed his hand once. Quit, that matters. He smiled sadly. You really believe we can save this place? Claire didn't hesitate. I wouldn't still be here if I didn't. For the first time in weeks, the weight on Ethan's shoulders seemed just a little lighter. Not because the problems had disappeared. They hadn't. The bank still wanted its money. Victor Caldwell would return. The ranch still stood on uncertain ground. But Ethan realized something as he looked at Claire, sitting beside him beneath a sky full of stars. For years, he had carried every burden alone. Now, someone else had chosen to help carry the weight. And somehow, that made the impossible feel just a little more possible. Monday morning began before the sun. Claire was already awake. Not because the alarm had gone off, because her mind refused to stop working. The bank's deadline, Victor Caldwell's offer, Richard Lawson's negotiations. Everything depended on proving one simple fact. Walker Ranch wasn't dying. It was recovering. She quietly slipped into the kitchen. The farmhouse was still dark. She switched on the small lamp above the dining table and opened her laptop. Rows of spreadsheets filled the screen. Projected revenue, operating costs, equipment depreciation, grant eligibility, cash flow forecasts. She had reviewed the numbers so many times, she could almost recite them from memory. A familiar voice came from behind her. You've been awake long. Claire looked over her shoulder. Ethan stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs. I was hoping to beat you. He smiled. You'll have to wake up around 3. I refuse. He handed her a mug. I thought coffee might help. Usually does. He sat across from her. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Only the quiet tapping of keyboard keys filled the room. Finally, Ethan asked, How bad is it? Claire leaned back. If we do nothing, we'll lose the ranch. And if we do everything. She turned the laptop toward him. We have a chance. A good one. She considered the question carefully. The numbers finally work. Bakafoma. There can't be a but. There always is. She pointed towards several highlighted sections. We have to increase revenue, reduce unnecessary costs, finish the restructuring, and convince the bank to believe in us. Ethan nodded slowly. So, we need a miracle? LeClaire smiled. No, we need a really good business plan. Later that morning, Richard Lawson arrived carrying a thick leather briefcase. He spread documents across the dining room table. I met with the bank. Ethan looked up immediately. And they're willing to listen. Claire straightened in her chair. That's better than refusing. Richard nodded. They've agreed to review a complete recovery proposal. Ethan frowned. They've already seen my financial statements. Richard smiled slightly. They've never seen Claire's. Claire opened another folder. I've prepared everything. Richard looked at the stack of reports. You've prepared more than everything. She shrugged. I got carried away. Richard flipped through the pages. Detailed forecasts, charts, expense analysis, risk assessments, grant applications, 5-year projections. He looked genuinely impressed. Claire, did you prepare all of this over one weekend? She nodded. I wasn't sleeping much. Richard looked toward Ethan. If this doesn't convince them, I'm not sure anything will. The meeting with the bank was scheduled for Wednesday. Until then, life continued. Because ranches didn't pause for financial negotiations. There were fences to repair, equipment to maintain, animals to feed. Claire insisted on helping outside after spending most of Monday buried in paperwork. Ethan handed her a pair of leatherwork gloves. You don't have to do this. I know. I'm choosing to. You looked at her carefully. You've changed. Claire laughed softly. So have my hands. She held them up. Tiny calluses had formed along her palms. A few months earlier, she would have considered them a disaster. Now, she almost felt proud of them. They're proof. Proof of what? That I'm actually useful out here. Ethan shook his head. You were useful before. I just hadn't realized it yet. Their assignment for the morning was repairing another section of fencing damaged during the previous winter. Claire measured replacement boards while Ethan secured new fence posts. You know, Ethan said, you swing a hammer much better now. Claire grinned. I've only hit my thumb twice this month. That's definite improvement. I choose to take that as a compliment. It was. She laughed. The sound echoed across the pasture. Several nearby cattle lifted their heads curiously before returning to grazing. The ranch somehow felt lighter whenever Claire laughed. Ethan had started noticing that. He wasn't sure when. Only that it had become true. By lunchtime, the fence stood perfectly straight. Claire stepped back to admire their work. I have to admit, that's satisfying. Ethan nodded. It never gets old. She looked across the endless rows of fencing stretching into the distance. I used to think success meant promotions, bigger offices, higher salaries. And now, she smiled. No. She lightly tapped one of the fence posts. This feels surprisingly rewarding. Ethan looked at her. You built something. I suppose I did. People need that. Claire looked across the fields. Maybe I always did. Wednesday arrived. The drive to First Prairie Agricultural Bank felt unusually quiet. Claire reviewed notes one final time. Richard sat in the front passenger seat organizing legal documents. Ethan concentrated on the road. No one wanted to say what everyone was thinking. Everything depended on today. The bank's regional office occupied a modern building nearly an hour away. Glass walls, marble floors, corporate artwork. Claire immediately felt memories returning. The polished professionalism, the expensive suits, the carefully rehearsed conversations. For just a second, she felt like she'd stepped back into her old life. Then Ethan quietly walked beside her. Mud still clung to his boots despite his best efforts. He looked slightly uncomfortable. Claire gently touched his arm. You belong here. He looked surprised. I don't exactly fit. You own 1,200 acres. They own a building. I think you're doing just fine. He smiled. The tension eased slightly. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. 3 bank representatives entered carrying thick folders. The senior manager introduced himself. Good morning. Richard handled the introductions. Claire noticed something immediately. The bankers were polite, professional, but skeptical. She expected that. The senior manager folded his hands. Mr. Walker, you've requested reconsideration. Richard nodded toward Claire. Actually, my client would like his financial advisor to begin. The banker looked surprised. Claire stood. She connected her laptop to the presentation screen. The first slide appeared. Walker Ranch Recovery Strategy. She took one slow breath, then began. For years, though, this ranch has been treated as a failing business. She changed the slide. It isn't. It has been poorly financed. Charts appeared. Expense breakdowns. Operational improvements. Revenue projections. Grant approvals already in progress. Insurance savings. Equipment restructuring. Agricultural diversification. Tourism potential. Every number supported the next. Claire spoke calmly, confidently, never exaggerating, never guessing. Whenever a banker asked a question, she already had the answer. 1 hour passed. Then another. Finally, the senior manager closed his folder. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this level of preparation. Claire smiled politely. I've had a busy few weeks. Another manager looked toward Ethan. How involved have you been in these operational improvements? Ethan answered honestly. Claire built the plan. I built fences. The room laughed quietly. Then Ethan continued. But she's right. We're already seeing results. I've spent years surviving. No. Whirly planning. The bankers exchanged thoughtful glances. The meeting ended without a decision. But something had changed. Claire could feel it. They no longer viewed Walker Ranch as another foreclosure. They saw potential. Driving home, no one spoke for nearly 15 minutes. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "I think we did well." Claire nodded. "So do I." Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel. "I've never seen anyone explain numbers like that." Claire smiled. "They're just stories." "What?" "Financial statements. They tell stories. You simply have to know how to read them." He looked at her briefly. "What story did ours tell?" Claire answered quietly. "That good people deserve another chance." Friday afternoon, a certified envelope arrived. Claire immediately recognized the bank's logo. She placed it carefully on the table. Ethan stared at it. Neither moved. Finally, Claire slid it toward him. "You should open it." His hands shook slightly. He unfolded the letter. "Read the first paragraph." Then the second. His eyes widened. Claire waited. "What does it say?" He looked up slowly. "They approved it." She blinked. "What?" "The restructuring." Richard's negotiations had succeeded. Claire's financial proposal had been accepted. The repayment schedule would be extended. Interest rates reduced. Grant funding included. It wasn't complete victory. But it was enough. Enough time. Enough breathing room. Enough hope. Ethan quietly sat down. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Claire smiled. "We did it." He looked at her. "No. You did." She shook her head. "We." He stood, walked around the table, then did something completely unexpected. He hugged her. It lasted only a few seconds. Neither of them planned it. Neither of them thought. It simply happened. When they stepped apart, both looked slightly embarrassed. Claire cleared her throat. "I suppose professional boundaries just got a little blurry." Ethan laughed. "I suppose they did." That evening, Samuel and Martha arrived carrying homemade pie. Richard joined them a little later. No one called it a celebration, but everyone knew exactly what it was. The ranch had survived another battle. As the sun disappeared behind the western hills, Claire stepped onto the porch for a moment alone. She looked across the fields glowing beneath the fading light. Footsteps approached behind her. Ethan joined her. "They believe in us now." Claire smiled. "They believe in the numbers." He shook his head. "I think they believed in you." She looked toward him. "You know, when we first met, I thought this marriage was simply paperwork." Claire laughed softly. "So did I." He looked out across the ranch. "It doesn't feel that way anymore." Claire's heart skipped. Before she could answer, he continued. "It feels like we're partners. Not just legally. Not just financially. Partners." The word settled quietly between them. Claire looked across the ranch they had fought so hard to protect. For the first time since signing the agreement, she realized something. She was no longer working to save Ethan's ranch. She was working to save their ranch. The thought both comforted her and frightened her more than she wanted to admit. The approval from the bank changed more than the ranch's finances. It changed the atmosphere. For the first time in years, Walker Ranch woke each morning with something it had almost forgotten. Not blonde optimism. Not unrealistic dreams. Real hope. There was still plenty of work ahead. Loans still had to be paid. Equipment still needed replacing. The drought hadn't magically disappeared. But now, the future existed again, and that was enough. Claire noticed the difference almost immediately. Ethan smiled more. Not often, not dramatically, but enough to matter. He whistled while repairing fences. He laughed when one of the calves escaped its pen. He even started teasing Samuel again. Little things. Normal things. The kind grief had quietly stolen years ago. One Tuesday morning, Claire walked into the kitchen carrying a notebook. "I've got an idea." Ethan looked up from his coffee. "Should I be worried?" "Probably." He smiled. "Go ahead." She opened the notebook. "I've been reviewing local events. The Harvest Festival is next weekend." Ethan nodded. "It always is. I noticed Walker Ranch hasn't participated for 3 years. We couldn't afford it. Claire turned another page. I think we should. He frowned thoughtfully. We don't exactly have extra money. We don't need much. She pointed at her notes. We can sell homemade preserves, fresh vegetables, honey from the neighboring farm, a few baked goods. We're rebuilding our reputation. This is free advertising. Ethan studied the figures. You've already done the math. I usually do. He laughed. I've noticed. So? He thought for a moment, then slowly nodded. Let's do it. Preparation consumed the rest of the week. Martha volunteered to bake pies. Samuel donated fresh pumpkins. Several neighboring ranchers offered vegetables to help fill the stand. Claire designed simple wooden signs by hand. Nothing flashy, just honest. Walker Ranch, family grown since 1936. Ethan watched her painting letters late one evening. I didn't know you were artistic. I'm not. She held the sign at arm's length. One corner leaned noticeably lower than the other. He smiled. I was trying to be encouraging. She laughed. It's crooked. It has character. That's a polite way of saying it's crooked. It absolutely is. Friday afternoon. The barn became a packing station. Wooden crates lined the floor. Fresh apples, corn, tomatoes, homemade jam, honey jars, fresh bread. Martha walked in carrying another basket. I made 6 more pies. The Claire looked impressed. When did you sleep? I'll sleep after the festival. Samuel entered behind her. I brought more pumpkins. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I thought you only had 4. I did. My wife volunteered the rest. Within an hour, the barn buzzed with activity. Neighbors came and went, everyone offering something. No one asking for payment. Claire quietly stood near the doorway watching. Martha noticed. What are you thinking? Claire smiled softly. I've never seen people help each other like this. Martha looked around the barn. We all need each other eventually. It's just how small towns survive. Claire nodded slowly. She liked that answer. Saturday morning arrived bright and cool. The town square transformed overnight. Colorful banners stretched between old brick buildings. Rows of wooden stalls filled the streets. Children ran through piles of hay. Live country music drifted across the square. The smell of fresh bread mixed with roasted corn and coffee. Claire stepped out of Ethan's pickup truck. She stopped walking. It's beautiful. Ethan smiled. I've been coming here since I was Lily's age. This feels, she searched for the right word, alive. It usually is. Setting up their booth took less than 30 minutes. Claire carefully arranged jars of jam in neat rows. Martha adjusted fresh flowers beside the display. Samuel stacked pumpkins into perfect pyramids. Ethan stepped back. I think it actually looks professional. Claire smiled proudly. It helps when nobody stores receipts beside the vegetables. He laughed. I'm never living that down. Never. The festival officially opened at 9. Within minutes, customers filled the streets. Families wandered from booth to booth. Children begged for homemade candy. Neighbors stopped to catch up after busy harvest weeks. Walker Ranch remained busy all morning. Claire greeted visitors with an easy smile. She explained where everything came from, how it had been grown, why supporting local farms mattered. People listened, they bought produce, asked questions, shared stories. More importantly, they remembered the Walker name. Around noon, Richard Lawson stopped by carrying 2 coffees. I thought you might need these. Claire accepted hers gratefully. You're officially my favorite attorney. I'll put that on my business card. Ethan laughed. Richard looked around the booth. You've nearly sold out. Claire nodded. We underestimated demand. That's usually a good problem. It definitely is. Richard lowered his voice slightly. I've already heard people talking. Claire looked curious. About what? About Walker Ranch recovering. They're noticing. Claire looked toward Ethan helping an elderly customer load pumpkins into her truck. For the first time, she realized the ranch wasn't just surviving privately. The whole community was beginning to believe again. Later that afternoon, the mayor climbed onto the small stage in the center of town. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank every local farm that helped make this year's harvest festival possible." Applause echoed through the square. Then, he continued, "I'd also like to recognize one family that has shown extraordinary perseverance." Claire looked toward Ethan. He looked just as confused. The mayor smiled. "Walker Ranch." The crowd applauded loudly. Ethan froze. Samuel nudged him. "Goo, I wasn't expecting this." Neither was anyone else. Ethan reluctantly walked onto the stage. The mayor handed him a small wooden plaque. 3 generations of honest farming. Thank you for refusing to give up." The applause grew even louder. Claire felt something tighten inside her chest. She wasn't applauding a successful businessman. She was applauding a man who had simply refused to quit. Sometimes. That was even more admirable. After the ceremony, people surrounded Ethan. Congratulations, handshakes, stories, old friends he hadn't seen in months. Claire quietly stepped away, giving him space. She wandered toward a nearby stand selling handmade quilts. Someone approached beside her. "Quite a day." She turned. It was Martha. Claire smiled. "I don't think I've ever seen Ethan look embarrassed. He hates attention." "I noticed." Martha folded her arms. "You've done something remarkable." Claire shook her head. "No. We all have." Martha smiled knowingly. "You're modest." Claire looked toward Ethan again. "I just helped organize things." "Nope." Martha answered gently. "You reminded him he didn't have to carry everything alone." Claire didn't know how to respond. Maybe that mattered more than spreadsheets ever could. As evening approached, string lights illuminated the town square. Music became slower. Families gathered near the dance floor. Someone announced the community dance. Claire immediately took one careful step backward. "Oh no," Martha noticed. "You dance." "Not willingly." Ethan walked over carrying lemonade. "What's going on?" "Martha thinks I should dance." "I think everyone should dance." Claire looked at Ethan. "Help me." He smiled. "I don't dance either." Martha laughed. "I don't believe either of you." Before either could protest, Samuel appeared behind Ethan. "You owe me one." "For what?" "For helping repair your south fence." Samuel gently pushed Ethan toward the dance floor. Martha took Claire's hand. Within seconds, both found themselves standing awkwardly in the middle of the wooden dance floor. The music began. Claire looked at Ethan. "I blame them." "So do I." Neither moved. The musicians continued playing. Finally, Ethan quietly extended one hand. "We might as well." Claire accepted it. His other hand rested lightly against her back. Her free hand settled on his shoulder. Neither spoke. They simply followed the slow rhythm. At first, everything felt awkward, carefully measured. Then, the nervousness faded. They weren't dancing to impress anyone. They weren't performing. They were simply enjoying the moment. Claire looked up. Ethan smiled. A genuine one. Not forced, not polite. Real, she realized. This was the happiest she'd ever seen him. The song ended. Neither immediately stepped away. Then both seemed to realize they were still standing close together. Claire cleared her throat. "I suppose we're better dancers than we expected." "Barely." "I'll accept barely." They laughed. Night settled over Ashton Creek. Fireworks launched from the fairgrounds outside town. Color exploded across the dark sky. Red, blue, gold, silver. Claire and Ethan stood beside the pickup truck watching quietly. Crowds cheered in the distance. The brilliant reflections danced across Claire's face. Ethan glanced toward her instead of the fireworks. For just a second, he forgot to look away. Claire noticed. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither smiled. There simply wasn't a need. Some moments carried their own language. The final firework burst high above the town. Golden sparks slowly drifted toward the earth. Claire whispered, "This has been the best day I've had in years." Ethan answered just as quietly, "Mine too." Neither of them realized that several people across the parking lot had been watching. Samuel smiled. Martha folded her arms with quiet satisfaction. Richard chuckled softly. They still think this is a marriage of convenience. Martha looked toward the couple standing beneath the fading fireworks. Not for much longer. None of them needed to say anything else. Sometimes, the heart told its story long before the people. Living it were ready to admit the truth. The Harvest Festival became the talk of Ashton Creek. For nearly a week, someone stopped Ethan every time he visited town. People congratulated him, asked about the ranch, complimented the produce. Several families even drove out to Walker Ranch just to buy fresh vegetables directly. Claire carefully tracked every sale, every receipt, every new customer. By Friday afternoon, she smiled at the latest spreadsheet. "What?" Ethan asked from across the office. She turned the laptop toward him. "Festival weekend increased our monthly income by almost 18%. He stared. 18. And that's before repeat customers. He slowly shook his head. "I thought it was just a nice community event." Claire grinned. "It was. It also happened to be excellent marketing." He laughed. "You really do see everything as numbers." She thought about that, then smiled. "Not everything." Life continued to improve. The repaired fences held. The cattle looked healthier. Rain had arrived just often enough to help the crops recover. Even the farmhouse felt different. Fresh flowers now sat on the kitchen table. The porch rocking chairs were used almost every evening. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once been painfully quiet. Sometimes, Claire forgot the marriage had started with a contract. Then she'd noticed the signed agreement tucked neatly inside the office filing cabinet. Reality quietly returned. 1 year. That was always the plan. Monday morning, Claire drove into Ashton Creek to mail several grant applications. The post office occupied one side of the town square. The cafe sat directly across the street. She dropped the envelopes into the outgoing mail slot, turned around, and froze. A familiar black luxury sedan had just parked beside the cafe. Her stomach tightened immediately. The driver's door opened. Daniel Brooks stepped onto the sidewalk. Perfect suit, expensive sunglasses, confident smile. Some people looked older after several difficult years. Daniel somehow looked exactly the same. He spotted Claire almost instantly. His smile widened. "Claire." She considered pretending she hadn't heard him. Instead, she nodded politely. "Daniel?" He walked toward her. "I've been trying to reach you. I noticed. You never returned my calls. There was a reason." He smiled as though nothing awkward had happened. "You look good. So do you. Country life suits you." Claire folded her arms. "What are you doing here?" "Business." He glanced toward the surrounding farmland. "There's quite a bit of investment happening around here." The Claire already disliked where the conversation seemed headed. Daniel gestured toward the cafe. "Can we talk?" "I don't think that's necessary. It'll only take a few minutes." Claire hesitated. "Finally," she agreed. 10 minutes. No more. The cafe was quiet. Only a few customers occupied the booths. Daniel ordered coffee. Claire declined. She wanted this conversation finished. So, Daniel leaned back comfortably. "I've heard impressive things." Claire raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "You?" "The financial recovery. The ranch." She remained expressionless. "I'm surprised you know about that. I make it my business to know successful people." Claire almost laughed. "That's convenient." He ignored the comment. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm listening." "My company wants you back." Claire stared at him. "What?" "We've grown. We're expanding. I've been authorized to offer you an executive position." He slid a folder across the table. Claire didn't touch it. The salary is significantly higher than your previous one. Company shares, performance bonuses, private office. She still didn't move. Daniel smiled confidently. You've proven yourself. We made a mistake. Claire looked at him for several long seconds. Finally, she asked the question that had been sitting quietly in her mind. Why now? He answered without hesitation. Because you're valuable. She nodded slowly. No. Because now I have leverage. His smile faded slightly. That's unfair? Is it? You fired me. I wasn't responsible. You benefited. He remained silent. Claire leaned forward. I spent years believing I wasn't good enough. Then I came here. I discovered something. Daniel looked curious. What? I was never the problem. Several miles away, Ethan worked alone repairing an irrigation pipe. Samuel drove up in his truck. You busy? Always. Samuel climbed out. I just came from town. Everything okay? Samuel hesitated. I saw Claire. Ethan smiled. She mailing paperwork again. She wasn't alone. So the smile disappeared. Ooh. Samuel scratched the back of his neck. A man. Wearing a fancy suit. They were having coffee. Ethan immediately looked away. Oh. Samuel watched him carefully. I figured you should know. Ethan nodded. Thanks. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally Samuel asked, You okay? I'm fine. Samuel wasn't convinced. Back at the cafe, Daniel pushed the folder closer. Just read it. The Claire finally opened it. The offer was impressive. More money than she'd ever earned. Stock options. Executive authority. Everything she'd spent years working toward. Daniel smiled confidently. I know you. You missed that world. Claire looked up slowly. No, Bo. I don't. Don't. You don't miss the salary. Not enough. The prestige. No. The opportunity. She closed the folder. What opportunity? Daniel looked confused. The chance to lead. The Claire smiled softly. I already do. He frowned. A ranch isn't exactly a corporation. No. It's honest. Daniel leaned back. You've changed. I have. For the better. She stood. Our 10 minutes are over. Daniel rose as well. You haven't answered. The Claire looked directly into his eyes. I just did. She handed the folder back. I'm not coming back. Ever. Daniel's confidence finally cracked. You'd really choose a struggling ranch over everything you've built. Claire answered without hesitation. I already have. Without another word, she walked out. Daniel remained standing beside the table. For the first time, he realized she truly wasn't coming back. Claire drove home with the windows down. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh, cut hay. She smiled. Not because the conversation had been easy, because it had finally ended. For years, Daniel represented everything she'd lost. Today, he represented nothing. As she turned into the ranch driveway, she immediately noticed Ethan repairing the front fence. He looked up, smiled politely, then returned to work. Something felt different. She parked and walked over. Hey, everything okay? Sure. His answer came too quickly. Claire recognized it immediately. Corporate meetings had taught her to identify forced confidence. She waited. Eventually, what happened in town? She blinked. You know, Samuel mentioned seeing you. Claire nodded. I ran into Daniel, the fiancé. Yes, Ethan continued working. What did he want? My old job. The hammer stopped moving. He offered you a position. She nodded. A very good one. Silence. Then, I guess congratulations are in order. The Claire stared at him. What? If it's what you want, you don't have to explain. I know this arrangement has an ending. She suddenly understood. He wasn't upset about Daniel. He was preparing himself for her leaving. Claire gently took the hammer from his hand. He looked at her. I turned him down. Ethan frowned. What? I turned down the job. Why? Because I don't want it. You worked years for that career. I know. And now? The Claire looked across the ranch. I've discovered something better. He searched her face. What? She smiled. Purpose. Ethan looked away before she could see the emotion in his eyes. That evening, they sat together on the porch as they had dozens of times before. Only tonight, the silence felt different. Eventually, Ethan spoke. I almost told you to take the job. Claire looked toward him. I know. You would have had more money. Bigger opportunities. She smiled gently. You forgot something. What? You never asked what I wanted. He looked surprised. I thought I knew. You assumed. She took a slow sip of coffee. What if this? She looked across the fields glowing beneath the setting sun. Is exactly where I want to be. Neither spoke again for several minutes. The evening breeze carried the familiar scent of wheat and fresh earth. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its final song before nightfall. Ethan quietly watched the sunset. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the ranch. He wasn't thinking about debt, or bills, or drought. He was thinking about the woman sitting beside him, and wondering when exactly she had become the first person he looked for at the end of every day. The days following Daniel's visit felt different. Nothing obvious had changed. The ranch still demanded long hours. The cattle still needed feeding before sunrise. The fences still seemed determined to find new ways to break. Yet, something between Claire and Ethan had shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough that both of them noticed. And neither of them knew what to do about it. Tuesday morning, Claire stood at the kitchen counter making coffee. She had become surprisingly good at it. Ethan walked in a few minutes later. You beat me. She smiled without looking up. By 7 minutes. I'll have to set my alarm earlier. I'd be worried if you did. He leaned against the counter. I've been meaning to ask. What? Do you miss the city? Claire poured coffee into 2 mugs before answering. Sometimes. What do you miss? She thought for a moment. Restaurants. Bookstores. Good internet. He laughed. I can fix one of those. The internet? No. The restaurants. Claire looked skeptical. You cook. I can grill. That's not the same thing. It counts. She smiled. I'll be the judge of that. Work that morning centered around repairing an old storage barn. Several support beams had begun showing signs of age. Claire measured replacement lumber while Ethan climbed onto a ladder to inspect the roof. You know. Ethan called down. You don't ask nearly as many questions anymore. Claire looked up. I finally know what most things are. That's true. She pointed toward one corner of the barn. I also know that beam needs replacing. He looked where she indicated, then nodded. I completely missed that. Claire folded her arms proudly. I'm becoming dangerous. You definitely are. By noon, the temperature climbed into the upper 80s. Claire wiped sweat from her forehead. I officially understand why ranchers wear hats. Ethan removed his own. You can borrow mine. She placed it on her head. It slipped slightly over her eyes. She laughed. It's enormous. It fits me. I don't understand how. He stepped closer. Without thinking, he gently adjusted the hat until it sat correctly. There. Claire looked up. Their faces were only inches apart. Neither moved. The world seemed strangely quiet. Then Samuel's truck rounded the corner of the barn. The moment disappeared. Samuel climbed out carrying a toolbox. I hope I'm not interrupting. Claire stepped back quickly. No. We were just... She searched for an explanation. Discussing hats. Samuel looked from Claire to Ethan. Then back again. I see. His expression suggested he didn't believe a word of it. That afternoon, Claire drove into town alone to deliver additional paperwork to Richard Lawson. As she crossed the town square N, she noticed Daniel's luxury sedan parked outside the hotel. Her stomach sank. Please don't let him still be here. She hurried toward Richard's office. Fortunately, Daniel never appeared. Richard accepted the documents with a smile. The bank approved another grant. Claire blinked. Already? Faster than expected. She laughed softly. I like good surprises. Richard studied her for a moment. You seem happier. The Claire looked out the office window. I think I am. The ranch agrees with you. It does. Richard leaned back in his chair. You know, when I first suggested this arrangement, I honestly believed it would simply save a business. Claire smiled. And now, I'm beginning to think it might save two people. Claire didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. On the drive home, Claire found herself thinking about Daniel. Not because she missed him, because she didn't. The realization surprised her. For years, the end of that relationship had defined her. The betrayal, the embarrassment, the career setback. Now, it simply felt like another chapter of her life, not the whole story. She smiled as Walker Ranch appeared on the horizon. Somewhere along the way, this place had quietly rewritten her future. Meanwhile, Ethan spent the afternoon repairing an old tractor with Samuel. Tools lay scattered across the workshop floor. The radio played softly in the background. Samuel tightened another bolt. So, Ethan didn't look up. So, you've been acting strange. I've been repairing a tractor. Not that. Samuel wiped grease from his hands. You look at Claire differently. Ethan sighed. We're not having this conversation. We absolutely are. There isn't anything to talk about. Samuel laughed. That's what everyone says. Ethan tightened another bolt with unnecessary force. It's a contract. I know. It has an ending. I know. Samuel leaned against the workbench. Tell me something. When she drove into town today, did you notice? Ethan didn't answer. You watched until her car disappeared. Still nothing. Samuel smiled knowingly. I've known you almost 30 years. You're in trouble. Ethan finally looked up. I made Grace a promise. Samuel's smile faded. I know. I promised I'd always love her. Samuel nodded slowly. And I still do. No one expects you not to. Ethan looked toward the workshop door. It feels wrong. What does? Caring about someone else. Samuel remained quiet for a long moment. Finally, Grace loved this ranch. More than anyone. Ethan nodded. You think she'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone? He didn't answer. You aren't replacing her. Samuel said gently. You're surviving her. Those words stayed with Ethan long after Samuel left. Late that evening, Claire found Ethan sitting beneath the old oak tree. The swing moved gently in the evening breeze. She walked over slowly. I've been looking for you. He smiled faintly. I needed some quiet. She sat on the wooden bench beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes. The sunset painted the fields gold. Finally, Claire asked softly, Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel guilty? She hesitated. For being happy again. Ethan looked at her in surprise. Why would you ask that? She stared toward the horizon. Because I do? You've lost someone? No. She smiled sadly. My old life. My career. The future I thought I wanted. She took a slow breath. Sometimes I catch myself enjoying this place so much. Then I wonder if that means I didn't really care about everything I lost. Ethan thought carefully before answering. I don't think happiness erases grief. She looked at him. I think it grows beside it. The Claire considered those words. They can exist together. I believe so. He looked toward Grace's bench. I still miss her every day. I probably always will. He looked across the fields. I also laughed at the harvest festival. I smiled today while fixing a fence. I enjoyed dinner yesterday. He shrugged gently. Missing someone doesn't mean life stops. Claire quietly nodded. She understood. Perhaps they were both healing in ways neither had expected. Friday morning. Walker Ranch received unexpected visitors. 2 pickup trucks pulled into the driveway. Then another. And another. Claire stepped outside. What is this? Samuel climbed out first. We heard the north pasture fencing still needed replacing. Martha followed carrying several baskets. I brought lunch. Another neighbor unloaded lumber. Someone else brought fence posts. One elderly rancher waved cheerfully. Figured you might need a hand. Claire looked around in amazement. Nearly 20 people had arrived. No one asked for payment. No one expected anything in return. They simply started working. By lunchtime, more than half the fencing had already been replaced. Claire quietly watched the volunteers laughing together. She turned toward Ethan. Does this happen often? He smiled. When someone needs help, Wes. Claire shook her head. I've spent my whole life in cities. I've never seen anything like this. Ethan looked around proudly. This is what community looks like. As the sun began to set, the final fence post slid into place. Everyone applauded, not because the work was extraordinary, because they had done it together. Claire stood beside Ethan watching neighbors load their trucks. Without realizing it, she slipped her hand into his. It felt completely natural, warm, comforting. Neither noticed for several seconds. When they finally did, neither pulled away. They simply stood there, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear across the fields. The ranch was still standing. The debt hadn't vanished. Challenges still waited ahead. But Claire realized something that evening. Daniel had offered her everything she used to dream about: money, status, prestige. She hadn't hesitated, because somewhere between muddy boots, early mornings, coffee on the porch, and people who showed up simply because someone needed help, she had already made her choice. She hadn't chosen a ranch. She had chosen a life. She simply hadn't been brave enough to admit it until now. At this point, what would you do if you were Claire? Stay and follow your heart, or return to the successful career you spent years building? Pause for a second and tell me what choice you'd make before we see what happens next. The weather forecast didn't worry Ethan. Not at first. Autumn storms weren't unusual. They arrived every year. A few days of heavy rain, strong winds, maybe a little hail, nothing the ranch hadn't survived before. But by Wednesday afternoon, the sky looked different. The air felt heavy. The birds disappeared. Even the cattle seemed restless. Claire noticed it while reviewing invoices in the office. She looked out the window toward the western horizon. Dark clouds stretched across the entire skyline. They weren't drifting, they were rolling. Fast. Ethan walked in carrying muddy boots. You saw it too. Claire nodded. Is it bad? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, it could be. By 3 o'clock, the wind had doubled. Loose leaves raced across the yard. Tree branches swayed harder with every passing minute. Samuel's truck appeared in the driveway. He climbed out before the engine had fully stopped. Ethan, I know. You've seen the radar? I just did. Samuel looked toward the sky. This one's moving faster than they predicted. Claire stepped onto the porch. What do we need to do? Ethan answered immediately. Everything. Everything. The ranch suddenly exploded into activity. Tractors moved equipment into covered storage. Trailers were secured. Feed bins were closed. Loose tools disappeared into the workshop. Claire followed across the property carrying ropes and tie. Down straps. What next? The generators. Already done. The fuel tanks. Checked. The greenhouse. I'm on it. Ethan looked at her with quiet appreciation. You've been paying attention. I've had a good teacher. There wasn't time for another conversation. The wind continued growing stronger. By late afternoon, the first drops of rain began falling. Large, cold, heavy. Within minutes, the gentle rain transformed into a downpour. Thunder echoed across the valley. Lightning flashed beyond the hills. Claire pulled her jacket tighter. I can't even see the south pasture. Ethan looked toward the distant tree line. We need to move the cattle. Now? Now? They climbed into the utility vehicle. Rain hammered the windshield. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The tires slipped through deepening mud. Claire gripped the dashboard. This is unbelievable. It'll get worse before it gets better. She glanced toward him. You sound awfully calm. I'm not. I've just learned panic doesn't fix fences. The cattle had gathered near the lower pasture, exactly where Ethan didn't want them. The creek beside the field had already begun rising. Ethan jumped out into the rain. Come on! His voice barely carried through the wind. Claire climbed out beside him. Cold rain soaked them instantly. Together, they slowly guided the herd toward higher ground. The animals sensed the danger. Some cooperated. Others refused to move. One frightened calf broke away. Claire saw it first. It's heading toward the creek. Without thinking, she ran. Mud splashed beneath every step. The frightened calf slipped near the embankment. Claire carefully moved around it. Easy. It's okay. Another flash of lightning illuminated the field. The calf hesitated, then slowly turned toward her voice. Ethan reached them seconds later. You okay? Claire nodded. I think so. Together they guided the calf safely back toward the herd. Ethan looked at her. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wasn't leaving it. For a second, neither noticed the rain. Then thunder shook the ground again. Let's move. By early evening, every animal had been moved into safer pastures. Claire climbed back into the truck completely soaked. Water dripped from her hair. Her boots squished with every movement. Ethan handed her a dry towel. You'll catch cold. I'll survive. He smiled. So stubborn. I've been told. The relief lasted less than 5 minutes. Samuel called over the radio. Ethan. Go ahead. The north barn. What about it? The roof's coming apart. Ethan immediately turned the truck around. Claire looked toward him. I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm coming. He didn't argue. The north barn stood against the wind like an old soldier refusing to surrender. Sheets of metal roofing rattled violently. One corner had already peeled upward. Rain poured through the opening. Hay bales inside were beginning to soak. We've got to close those doors, Ethan shouted. The wind nearly swallowed his voice. Together they fought their way across the muddy yard. Claire grabbed one heavy barn door. The wind pushed it back harder than she expected. She nearly lost her footing. Ethan caught the edge before it slammed open again. Push! I'm trying. For several exhausting seconds, neither door moved. Then, with one final effort, the massive wooden doors slammed shut. Ethan secured the heavy locking bar. Both leaned against the doors, catching their breath. Claire laughed unexpectedly. What? Ethan asked. If anyone had told me 6 months ago I'd be wrestling barn doors during a thunderstorm, I would have called them crazy. He laughed too. They would have been right. Lightning struck somewhere nearby. The thunder arrived almost instantly. The entire barn shook. Claire instinctively stepped closer. Neither of them mentioned it outside. The storm continued to roar. Inside, the old barn groaned beneath the wind. For nearly an hour, they checked every section of the building. Animals remained calm. Equipment stayed secure. Nothing more could be done. Eventually, Ethan looked toward the doors. We wait. The Claire nodded. So we wait. They sat on overturned feed buckets listening to the storm. Rain hammered the roof. Wind whistled through tiny gaps in the walls. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It rarely was anymore. Claire finally spoke. Were storms always this frightening? No. What changed? I have more to lose now. She looked at him carefully. You mean the ranch? He nodded. The ranch. Claire wasn't entirely convinced. Several hours later, the worst of the wind finally passed. The rain softened into a steady drizzle. They cautiously stepped outside. The ranch looked different. Tree branches covered the yard. Several fence sections had collapsed. One equipment shed leaned noticeably. Part of the old machine storage roof had disappeared entirely. Claire slowly turned in a circle. Oh, Ethan remained silent. He was already counting repairs, calculating costs, planning weeks of work. Samuel's truck pulled into the driveway again. He climbed out and looked across the damage. It could have been worse. Ethan nodded. It could have. No animals lost. No injuries. The Claire quietly added, "We'll rebuild." Both men looked toward her. She smiled despite the exhaustion. "We've done harder things." Samuel chuckled. "She's right." Ethan looked across the broken fencing stretching toward the horizon, then back at Claire. For years, storms had always ended the same way. He stood alone, trying to figure out how to fix everything. Tonight, someone stood beside him, not because she had to, because she wanted to. The damage suddenly seemed manageable, not easy, not inexpensive, but possible. As dawn slowly broke across Walker Ranch, golden sunlight pushed through the remaining storm clouds. It illuminated broken fences, scattered branches, damaged buildings, and two people standing side by side, tired, mud-covered, completely exhausted. Yet somehow, more determined than ever. The storm had left its mark on the ranch. But it had also revealed something neither Claire nor Ethan could ignore any longer. When trouble came, their first instinct was no longer to protect themselves. It was to protect each other. The morning after the storm felt strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. The wind had disappeared. The rain clouds drifted east. Only scattered puddles and broken branches remained to remind anyone how violent the night had been. Claire stepped onto the farmhouse porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. The air smelled fresh. Wet earth, pine trees, fresh, cut wood. She found Ethan standing near the front fence. His hands rested on the top rail as he silently surveyed the damage. She walked beside him. Coffee. He accepted the mug. Thanks. Neither spoke immediately. They simply looked across the ranch. Several sections of fencing had collapsed. One equipment shed had partially lost its roof. The north barn would need repairs before winter. The damage looked overwhelming. Claire finally broke the silence. It could have been worse. Ethan nodded. It could. She smiled gently. We've survived every difficult day so far. He looked toward her. I've noticed something. What? Whenever things go wrong, you always start with the good news. The Claire shrugged. It keeps me moving. He smiled. I like that. By 7 o'clock, pickup trucks began arriving. Claire counted 1, then 3, then 6. By 8, more than 20 volunteers stood in the ranch yard. Samuel climbed out first, already carrying a chainsaw. We figured you might need some help. Behind him, neighbors unloaded fencing supplies, replacement lumber, roofing sheets, generators, tools. Someone even brought breakfast sandwiches for everyone. Claire looked around in amazement. Again, no one discussed money. Nobody asked for reimbursement. Nobody kept score. People simply started working. Martha carried several large containers toward the farmhouse. I've taken over your kitchen. The Claire laughed. I wasn't using it anyway. Exactly. Within an hour. The kitchen smelled like homemade soup and fresh bread. Outside, the sound of hammers echoed across the property. Claire walked toward the north pasture. Groups of neighbors already worked side by side, replacing damaged fence posts. She quietly asked Samuel, "How did everyone know?" He smiled. They saw the storm. That was enough. Ethan climbed onto the damaged barn roof with 3 other ranchers. Claire immediately walked over. What are you doing? Fixing the roof. I can see that. You shouldn't be climbing around up there. He smiled. I've been climbing barns since I was 12. And I've been worrying about safety since yesterday. Samuel laughed from below. I think you've officially got someone looking after you. Ethan looked down at Claire. She folded her arms. I'm serious. He held both hands up dramatically. Yes, ma'am. The volunteers nearby laughed. Claire shook her head. I can't believe that worked. Throughout the morning, She moved from one work crew to another, organizing supplies, delivering water, updating repair lists, checking inventories. By lunchtime, she had accidentally become the unofficial project manager. One neighbor approached carrying a clipboard. "Claire, where do you want these fence posts?" Another asked, "We're short 6 roofing panels." Someone else shouted, "What comes next?" Claire blinked, then laughed. Apparently, her corporate management skills had finally found the perfect workplace. Around noon, everyone gathered beneath the old oak tree for lunch. Long folding tables stretched across the yard. Soup, sandwiches, fresh bread, homemade pie. Martha looked around proudly. Nobody leaves hungry. Samuel immediately reached for a second sandwich. I've never argued with that rule. Claire watched everyone talking, laughing, sharing stories. There were no executives, no departments, no titles, only neighbors. She quietly leaned toward Ethan. "I've never seen teamwork like this." He smiled. "It's because nobody's here for a paycheck. They're here because someday they might need the same help." Claire looked around again. The entire idea felt almost impossible. Yet, she was watching it happen. After lunch, the rebuilding continued. Claire carried fresh boards toward the workshop. As she rounded the corner, she heard familiar laughter. Lily. She smiled before she even saw her. Lily ran across the yard wearing oversized work gloves that were clearly much too big. "I came to help." Claire knelt to hug her. "I heard. I brought cookies." Claire laughed. "Those might actually be more important." Lily looked around proudly. "I can carry little boards. I'm very strong." Claire pretended to inspect Lily's arms. "I can see that. They're impressive." Lily flexed dramatically. Claire applauded. Nearby, Ethan watched quietly. He hadn't realized how naturally Claire fit into moments like this. Nothing about her interaction with Lily felt forced or rehearsed. It simply worked. Later that afternoon, Claire found Lily sitting beneath the oak tree sketching again. "What are you drawing today?" Lily held up the notebook. "Our barn." Claire smiled. It looked surprisingly accurate. Then she noticed something else. The drawing showed 3 people standing together. Ethan, Lily, Claire, all smiling. Claire pointed gently. "You keep drawing me." Lily looked confused. "Why wouldn't I?" Claire searched for an answer. She couldn't find one. Lily continued coloring. "You live here. You eat dinner with us. You make Dad laugh." She looked up. "That's what family does." Claire felt tears threatening. She blinked quickly before Lily noticed. Children had a remarkable way of saying profound things without realizing it. By late afternoon, most of the fencing had already been repaired. The new barn roof gleamed beneath the sunlight. Broken branches had disappeared. The ranch looked alive again. Not perfect, but recovering. Samuel climbed down from the roof. I'd call that a good day's work. The volunteers applauded one another, not because the job was finished, because progress had been made. As people slowly packed their trucks, Martha hugged Claire. "You belong here." Claire smiled softly. "I wasn't expecting to hear that today. I've been thinking it for weeks." Martha looked toward Ethan speaking with several neighbors. "He's different." Claire followed her gaze. "What do you mean?" "I haven't seen him stand that straight since Grace passed." Claire looked carefully. Martha was right. The heaviness that had once followed Ethan everywhere seemed lighter, not gone, just lighter. The last truck finally disappeared down the driveway. Silence returned. Claire and Ethan walked slowly across the repaired pasture. Fresh fence posts stood perfectly straight. The new barn roof reflected the setting sun. Claire sighed. "It almost looks better than before." Ethan laughed. "Don't let the volunteers hear you. They'll expect storms every year." She smiled. "I'll keep it to myself." They reached the old oak tree. The swing moved gently in the evening breeze. Claire sat down. Ethan remained standing. "You should sit." I've got mud everywhere. So do I? He looked at his boots, then quietly sat beside her. The valley stretched before them. Golden light rolled across the fields. Everything felt peaceful. After several minutes, Claire spoke. You know what surprised me most today? What? I wasn't thinking about the damage. I was thinking about how many people came. Ethan nodded. They've always been there. I guess I stopped noticing. She looked toward him. I don't think you stopped noticing. I think you stopped believing anyone would. He didn't answer, because she was right. After Grace died, he'd slowly convinced himself that every burden belonged to him alone. Today had reminded him otherwise. A cool breeze drifted across the hill. Claire tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Without thinking, Ethan reached over and gently brushed a small streak of dirt from her cheek. His hand stopped the instant he realized what he'd done. Claire looked at him. Neither spoke, neither moved. The world seemed to disappear around them. Only the evening breeze remained. Claire smiled softly. I missed a spot. He smiled back. Apparently. Neither stepped away. For one brief moment, everything felt perfectly still. Then, Lily's cheerful voice echoed from the farmhouse. Dad. Dinner. Both laughed quietly. The moment passed, but neither forgot it. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Claire stood alone on the porch watching stars appear one by one. Ethan quietly joined her. You know, he said softly, I don't think the storm only repaired the ranch. Claire looked toward him. What do you mean? He smiled. I think it repaired something in me. Claire didn't answer immediately. Finally, I think it repaired something in me too. Neither needed to explain. Some things couldn't be measured, or calculated, or written into contracts. Healing wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen all at once. Sometimes, it arrived disguised as shared work, quiet conversations, neighbors with hammers, a child calling your name at dinner, and someone who gently brushed the dirt from your cheek, as though taking care of you had already become the most natural thing in the world. Winter arrived quietly. There were no dramatic snowstorms, no frozen roads, just cold mornings, frost covering the pasture, thin wisps of smoke rising from farmhouse chimneys across Ashton Creek. Walker Ranch looked different beneath the pale winter sun. The fields rested. The busiest harvest work had ended. For the first time in months, life slowed down, at least on the surface. Inside the farmhouse, something else quietly counted down. The contract. Claire noticed the date while updating the ranch calendar. She stared at it longer than she intended. 321 days. That was how long she had lived at Walker Ranch. 44 days remained. Only 44. She quietly closed the calendar. For months, she had managed to forget. Now, it seemed impossible to think about anything else. She carried fresh coffee into the kitchen. Ethan was already reading through equipment catalogs. Morning. Morning. He smiled. You've started making coffee before I wake up. I refuse to let you win every morning. I appreciate the competition. She laughed softly. The conversation felt completely normal, which somehow made the calendar even harder to forget. That afternoon, Claire buried herself in work. She reorganized inventory records, reviewed winter maintenance schedules, updated next year's operating budget, anything to avoid thinking. Eventually, Richard Lawson stopped by unexpectedly. He removed his coat and accepted a cup of coffee. I was passing through. The Claire smiled. Lawyers don't usually pass through. He laughed. Fair point. Ethan joined them at the dining table. Richard looked around the farmhouse. You've both done remarkable work. Claire glanced toward Ethan. We've been fortunate. No. Richard corrected gently. You've been determined. He reached into his briefcase. I also brought something. Claire's stomach tightened. Richard placed a single folder on the table. She recognized it immediately. The marriage agreement. Nobody spoke. Richard finally broke the silence. I thought you deserved some notice. The agreement officially expires next month. The room became painfully quiet. Ethan nodded once. I know. Claire looked down at the folder. She hadn't expected seeing it to hurt. But somehow, it did. Richard carefully continued. Legally, you have several options. He spoke like an attorney. Calm, professional. You may renew, terminate, or convert the agreement into a traditional marriage. Claire almost smiled. The legal wording somehow made everything sound much simpler than it actually was. Richard looked between them. You don't have to decide today. He quietly stood. I'll leave the paperwork here. After he left, neither Claire nor Ethan touched the folder. The following morning, Claire woke before dawn. Sleep had become difficult. She walked quietly downstairs. The farmhouse remained silent. She sat beside the fireplace holding a blanket around her shoulders. Grace's photograph rested on the mantel. Claire looked at it for several long moments. You were loved very much. The words escaped before she realized she had spoken them. Footsteps sounded behind her. Ethan, I couldn't sleep either. Claire smiled faintly. I figured. He sat in the armchair opposite her. Neither mentioned the contract. Not yet. Instead, they simply watched the fire. Finally, Ethan spoke. Winter always reminds me of her. But Claire nodded. You decorated for Christmas together. He smiled, terribly. What do you mean? We argued every year about lights. Claire laughed. You argued. I liked white lights. Grace insisted on every color imaginable. Who won? He smiled toward the fire. Grace. Every year. Claire pictured it. The quiet farmhouse. Laughter. Colored lights. A little girl opening presents. A family. She suddenly felt like she was looking through a window into someone else's beautiful memory. One she could never truly belong to. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire became unusually busy. She volunteered for every chore. Accepted every project. Spent longer hours in the office than necessary. Ethan noticed immediately. You don't have to reorganize the workshop. I'm already here. The workshop is already organized. It could be more organized. He smiled. I think you're avoiding something. She looked away. I have work. He quietly nodded. He understood. Because he was doing exactly the same thing. Saturday brought Lily home again. She immediately sensed something unusual. Children always noticed first. She found Claire sitting at the dining table reviewing next year's planting budget. Are you sad? The Claire looked up. What makes you ask that? You smile differently. Claire blinked. I do. Lily nodded. You smile with your mouth, but not your eyes. Claire felt her throat tighten. She gently closed the notebook. I've just been thinking. About what? The Claire searched for an answer simple enough for a child. Sometimes, grown-ups have difficult decisions. Lily considered that. Is it about the papers? Claire looked surprised. What papers? The ones Dad keeps staring at. The Claire's heart sank. Even Lily had noticed. That evening, the three of them decorated the farmhouse for Christmas. Boxes filled with ornaments emerged from the attic. Some dated back decades, others belonged to Grace. Claire carefully unwrapped a small wooden angel. It's beautiful. Ethan smiled. Grace carved that. Claire handled it gently. It should go near the top. He nodded. I think she'd agree. Lily carried a string of colorful lights toward Ethan. Dad, you have to use these. He laughed. I was hoping for white lights. Lily folded her arms dramatically. Mom always won. Claire looked between them, then quietly smiled. I think tradition matters. Ethan looked at both of them, then surrendered. I suppose colorful lights it is. Lily cheered triumphantly. Claire couldn't stop smiling. For just a moment, it almost felt like they'd always done this together. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Claire stepped outside. Fresh snow had begun falling. Tiny flakes drifted silently across the fields. Everything looked peaceful. Ethan joined her carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I thought coffee deserved a night off. She accepted one gratefully. Good choice. They stood beside the porch railing, watching snow slowly cover the pasture. It'll be beautiful tomorrow, Claire whispered. It always is. Another long silence settled between them. Eventually, Claire gathered enough courage. Ethan. Eat him. What happens after the contract ends? He stared across the white fields. I don't know. She nodded slowly. I've been trying to imagine leaving. He remained quiet. I can't. The words surprised both of them. Claire continued before she lost the courage. I keep packing boxes in my head. I keep imagining another apartment, another office, another city. She shook her head. It doesn't feel real anymore. Ethan looked down into his mug. I've been trying to imagine this house without you. Claire looked toward him. And? He smiled sadly. I keep setting 2 coffee mugs on the counter. Neither of them laughed. The truth hung quietly between them. Neither wanted life to return to what it had been. Neither knew how to say it. Not yet. The following week, Claire quietly began packing a few personal belongings into storage boxes. Nothing obvious. Old notebooks. Extra clothes. Books she rarely read. She told herself it was practical. Preparing early simply made sense, but every item she placed into a box felt strangely heavy. Ethan accidentally walked past her bedroom. He noticed the open suitcase. Folded clothes, packed books. He didn't say a word. He simply continued walking. Claire noticed him. She wanted to explain. She didn't know how. That night, Ethan stood alone beneath the old oak tree. The swing moved gently in the cold breeze. Snow rested across the empty fields. For nearly a year, he had convinced himself the contract protected both of them. Now, it felt like a countdown. Inside the farmhouse, Claire quietly looked out her bedroom window. She could see Ethan standing beneath the tree, completely still. She almost walked outside. Almost. Instead, she remained where she was, because both of them feared the same thing. The moment either admitted how much this arrangement had come to mean, the possibility of losing it would become painfully real. And sometimes, hope was far more frightening than loneliness. The first box sat beside Claire's bedroom door, then another, then a third. None of them were full. She packed slowly, almost reluctantly. A sweater, several books, old notebooks, the framed photograph of her parents that had traveled with her from the city. Every time she folded another shirt, she found another reason to stop. Maybe this drawer should wait until tomorrow. Maybe the books didn't need packing yet. Maybe she wasn't really leaving. But the calendar said otherwise. The contract expired in 12 days. Reality had become impossible to ignore. Downstairs, Ethan pretended not to notice. He carried firewood into the house, repaired a loose cabinet hinge, cleaned equipment that was already clean. Anything to stay busy, anything except walking past Claire's bedroom, because every glimpse of another packed box felt like losing something all over again. Breakfast became unusually quiet. Claire poured coffee. Ethan buttered toast. Neither mentioned the growing stack of boxes upstairs. Finally, Claire forced a smile. I finished the inventory report. Ethan nodded. I saw. I also updated next year's planting budget. Looks good. I reorganized the maintenance schedule. I noticed. Another silence. The conversations had become painfully practical. Neither trusted themselves with anything deeper. That afternoon, Richard Lawson stopped by with revised legal paperwork. He immediately sensed the atmosphere inside the farmhouse. You've both become awfully quiet. Neither answered. Richard looked around the room. His eyes settled briefly on the sealed moving boxes stacked near the staircase. Understanding crossed his face. I see. He quietly placed several documents on the dining table. The contract officially ends next Friday. Claire looked at the papers. They suddenly seemed far heavier than a few sheets of paper should. Richard spoke gently. Legally, if no extension is filed, the marriage automatically dissolves. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for the documents. Richard sighed quietly. I'll give you both some time. After he left the house somehow felt even quieter. Later that evening, Claire drove into Ashton Creek alone. She told Ethan she needed more packing supplies. That part was true. But mostly, she needed to think. She parked beside the small lake outside town. The same lake where families often gathered during summer. Now, winter had emptied the shoreline. Only the sound of wind moved across the water. Claire wrapped her coat tighter around herself. She remembered arriving in Ashton Creek nearly a year earlier. Everything had felt temporary. She had promised herself she wouldn't become attached. No emotional risks. No complicated endings. Just 1 year. Help save the ranch. Move on. Simple. Instead, the ranch had quietly become home. And somehow, home had become much harder to leave than the city ever had. Meanwhile, Samuel found Ethan repairing an old wagon wheel inside the workshop. You've been fixing that thing for 3 hours. Ethan didn't look up. It needs work. Samuel walked closer. No. It doesn't. Ethan finally sighed. I know. Samuel leaned against the workbench. You planning on talking to her? About what? Samuel gave him a look. Don't. I'm serious. So am I. Ethan carefully set the wrench down. What exactly am I supposed to say? The Samuel answered immediately. The truth. Ethan looked toward the open workshop door. It's too late. No, it isn't. The contract's ending. So. That was always the agreement. Samuel folded his arms. And if the agreement was wrong, Ethan remained silent. You love her? You don't even have to answer. I've watched you. You smile before she enters a room. You save the last piece of pie because it's her favorite. You check the weather forecast every morning to make sure she'll be safe working outside. Samuel shook his head. You've already answered. Ethan quietly sat on an overturned bucket. I made promises. Samuel's expression softened. You also deserve another chance. That same evening, Claire returned home, carrying far fewer packing boxes than she'd intended. She found Martha waiting on the porch. I thought you might stop by. The Claire smiled tiredly. I needed fresh air. Martha held up a covered baking dish. I brought lasagna. Claire laughed softly. I should have guessed. The two women sat together on the porch while the dish cooled. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Martha asked, How are you really doing? The Claire looked out across the snowy fields. I'm pretending to be practical. And it's exhausting. Martha nodded. I imagined. The Claire hesitated, then quietly admitted, I don't want to leave. The words hung in the cold evening air. Martha reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Then why are you packing? Claire looked confused. Because the contract's over. Has Ethan asked you to leave? No. As he said, he wants the marriage to end. Claire blinked. No. Then what exactly are you assuming? Claire stared down into her untouched cup of tea. She didn't have an answer. Saturday morning. Lily arrived for the weekend. She ran inside carrying her backpack, then stopped abruptly. The moving boxes caught her attention immediately. She looked toward Claire. What's happening? Claire forced another smile. I'm organizing. Lily wasn't convinced. Why are your clothes inside boxes? Claire knelt beside her. The agreement Dad and I made. It's almost finished. Lily looked confused. I don't understand. The Claire searched for the gentlest explanation. I came here to help save the ranch. You did. And now, my job might be finished. Lily looked toward Ethan. He remained completely silent. The little girl's face slowly changed. You're leaving. Claire couldn't answer. Instead, she gently nodded. Lily quietly picked up her backpack. I don't want pancakes anymore. She walked upstairs without another word. The sound of her bedroom door closing echoed through the farmhouse. Claire covered her face with both hands. I handled that terribly. Ethan looked toward the staircase. No, I did. For the rest of the afternoon, the farmhouse felt strangely empty. Lily stayed upstairs drawing. Claire packed another box. Ethan repaired another cabinet. 3 people occupied the same house. Yet nobody knew what to say. Near sunset, Claire carried one sealed box toward the hallway. As she reached the stairs, the bottom corner caught the edge of the rug. The box slipped. Books scattered across the floor. Photographs slid in every direction. One framed picture landed face up. It showed the 3 of them, taken during the harvest festival. Claire, Ethan, Lily, all smiling. Claire stared at it. She hadn't even realized Ethan had printed a copy. He quietly picked it up. I was going to put it in the living room. But Claire looked at the picture. It looks like... She stopped. What? Family. The word escaped before she could stop it. Neither spoke. The silence felt almost unbearable. Finally, Claire carefully took the photograph from his hands. I should finish packing. She walked upstairs before the tears reached her eyes. That night, snow fell again. Soft, silent, beautiful. Claire stood alone in her bedroom folding the last of her clothes. The room looked strangely empty. She remembered her first night here. The guest room, the handmade quilt, the view across the eastern pasture. She had arrived expecting 12 months. Nothing more. Now, every wall held a memory. Every floorboard sounded familiar. Every sunrise belonged to this place. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Claire. Ethan's voice. Yeah. The porch. I made hot chocolate. She smiled sadly. I'll be right down. They stood together beneath the porch roof watching snow settle across the fields. Neither mentioned the packed boxes. Neither mentioned next Friday. Instead, they watched the quiet beauty of winter. Finally, Ethan spoke. You've done more for this ranch than anyone could have imagined. Claire looked at him. It wasn't just the ranch. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? She smiled through tears she could no longer hide. This place. She looked across the snow-covered fields. Saved me too. Before Ethan could answer, Claire quietly walked back inside. Because if she stayed one moment longer, she wasn't sure she'd ever find the strength to leave. Behind her, Ethan remained standing alone beneath the falling snow, watching the porch door close, knowing that if he stayed silent much longer, he might lose the woman who had quietly become the heart of Walker Ranch. Friday arrived far too quickly. The sunrise looked exactly the same. Golden light stretched across the eastern pasture. The cattle wandered toward the feeding stations. The coffee maker gurgled quietly in the kitchen. Everything appeared normal. Except, nothing felt normal. Claire stood in the guest bedroom looking at the last unopened drawer. There wasn't much left. A scarf. A few notebooks. One plaid shirt she had borrowed from Ethan months ago, and somehow never returned. She folded it carefully, then stopped. It still carried the faint scent of cedar and fresh hay. She closed her eyes. This isn't helping. Slowly, she placed it inside the suitcase. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table staring at 2 coffee mugs. One belonged to him. One belonged to Claire. For almost a year, preparing 2 cups had become automatic. Now he caught himself wondering whether tomorrow there would only be one. The thought settled heavily in his chest. He heard footsteps. Claire entered carrying another box. Morning. Morning. She smiled politely. He smiled back. Both smiles disappeared almost immediately. Claire picked up her coffee. I'll finish packing after breakfast. Ethan nodded. Okay. Neither touched their food. By mid-morning, Richard Lawson arrived. He carried a slim leather folder beneath one arm. Claire recognized it immediately. Final paperwork. Richard greeted them both warmly. I wish I were visiting under happier circumstances. Claire forced a smile. I suppose paperwork doesn't wait. It rarely does. He laid the folder on the dining table. The dissolution documents are ready. Nobody reached for them. Richard quietly continued. If you both sign today, the legal process becomes effective next Friday. The words echoed through the room. Claire looked at the papers. One signature, just like the beginning, except this one felt much heavier. Richard looked from Claire to Ethan. You still have time. No decision has to be made today. He stood. I'll leave these here. As the front door closed behind him, silence settled over the farmhouse once again. Claire picked up one of the documents. She read the first paragraph. The language was cold, clinical. The parties mutually agree. The contractual marriage. The termination of obligations. She laughed softly. Ethan looked up. What? It's strange. What is? 100 pages brought us together. She looked down at the single sheet of paper. And one page ends everything. Ethan didn't answer. Because she was right. Around lunchtime, Samuel pulled into the driveway. He climbed out carrying a toolbox. I figured I'd help with that broken gate. Ethan nodded. Thanks. The two men worked quietly for nearly an hour. Finally, Samuel spoke. You're running out of time. Ethan kept tightening bolts. I know. No, I don't think you do. Ethan sighed. Samuel, I'm serious. You've spent months pretending this is only a contract. It stopped being only a contract a long time ago. Ethan looked toward the farmhouse. Claire could be seen through the office window organizing files. I don't know if she feels the same. Samuel almost laughed. She turned down her old career. She rebuilt your ranch. She practically raised your daughter every weekend. She packed her suitcase with tears in her eyes. He folded his arms. How much more evidence do you need? Ethan remained silent. Samuel lowered his voice. You're not protecting her anymore. You're protecting yourself. Those words hit harder than Ethan expected. Because deep down, he knew they were true. Inside the farmhouse, Claire carefully labeled the final storage box. Kitchen notes, budget files, garden plans. She smiled sadly. Garden plans. She had made plans for vegetables that wouldn't even be harvested until next summer. Without realizing it, she had planned a future she never expected to see. A soft knock came at the front door. Claire opened it. Martha stood there holding a basket of fresh cinnamon rolls. I baked too many. The Claire smiled faintly. I don't believe that for a second. I didn't expect you to. They sat together in the kitchen. After a few minutes, Martha quietly asked, Have you signed? Claire shook her head. No. Why not? The Claire looked toward the papers resting on the table. Because once I do, it's real. Martha nodded gently. Do you love him? Claire stared into her coffee. The answer came before she could stop it. Yes. Barely above a whisper. But it was enough. Martha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Have you told him? Claire laughed sadly. Nope. Why? Because he still loves Grace. Martha smiled softly. My dear, those two things aren't enemies. Claire looked confused. What do you mean? He'll always love Grace. That's never going to change. She paused. But loving Grace doesn't prevent him from loving you. Claire felt tears gathering again. What if I'm wrong? Martha smiled. What if you're right? Late that afternoon, Lily arrived unexpectedly. It wasn't her usual weekend. Claire immediately looked surprised. I thought you were staying with Aunt Sarah. I asked Dad if I could come. She walked into the living room. Then noticed the legal documents on the table. Children often miss details. Not Lily. She quietly picked up the top page. What are these? Nobody answered. Lily looked from Ethan to Claire, then back again. You're really leaving? Claire knelt beside her. Before she could finish, Lily stepped backward. No. The little girl's voice trembled. No. Claire's heart broke. Lily, you said families stay together. The Claire closed her eyes. I know. So why are you leaving ours? The question filled the entire room. No adult had an answer. Lily looked directly at Ethan. Do something. He stood completely still. Dad, please. He still couldn't speak. Tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. You already lost Mom. I don't want to lose Claire too. The farmhouse fell silent. Even the clock on the wall suddenly seemed louder. Lily looked at her father with heartbreaking disappointment. If you love someone, you tell them. She wiped away another tear. Mom told me that. Then she quietly ran upstairs. Her bedroom door closed. The sound echoed through the house. Nobody moved. Claire remained kneeling beside the sofa. Ethan stared at the staircase. Samuel quietly removed his hat. Martha looked toward the floor. Finally, Samuel spoke. She's right. Ethan slowly sat down. His hands covered his face. I've been so afraid. Martha answered gently. Off what? Off forgetting Grace. His voice cracked. Off betraying her. Martha walked over and rested a hand on his shoulder. You loved my daughter. You gave her a beautiful life. You kept every promise you possibly could. She smiled through her own tears. But Ethan, Grace never asked you to stop living. He looked up. I don't know how. You already have. She glanced toward the staircase. You just haven't admitted it. That evening, Claire quietly carried another box toward the front door. She planned to load the car before dark. As she reached the porch, she stopped. The ranch looked peaceful. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The cattle gathered beneath the old oak tree. Everything she loved stood right in front of her, and tomorrow, she might be leaving it all behind. Behind her. The front door opened. Ethan stepped outside. He watched Claire standing beside the packed car. For the first time in nearly a year, he stopped making excuses. Stopped hiding behind promises. Stopped pretending the contract explained everything. He finally understood the truth. He wasn't afraid of starting over. He was afraid of losing Claire, and unless he found the courage to tell her, that was exactly what was about to happen. Saturday morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky. The ranch looked peaceful. Fresh snow covered the fields. Thin smoke drifted lazily from the farmhouse chimney. Everything appeared calm. Claire wished her heart felt the same. She quietly loaded the final suitcase into the trunk of her car. 1 year. It had passed faster than she ever imagined. She stood beside the driver's door for several seconds, looking at the farmhouse, the old red barn, the oak tree, the porch where she and Ethan had shared countless cups of coffee, the dining room window where Lily always waved goodbye on Sunday evenings. Every corner held a memory now. Every memory made leaving harder. Inside the house, Ethan stood frozen in the kitchen. He had watched Claire carry the last suitcase outside. His mind screamed at him to move. His feet refused. Richard's paperwork still rested on the dining table, unsigned, waiting. Samuel quietly entered through the back door. He didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at Ethan, then toward the window. Claire was climbing into her car. Samuel finally spoke. If you let her drive away, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened. Ethan closed his eyes. I don't know what to say. Samuel shook his head. Then stop planning. Just tell her the truth. What if she doesn't feel the same? Samuel smiled sadly. That's a risk. So is losing her forever. Ethan looked toward the photograph sitting on the fireplace. Grace smiled back exactly as she always had. For years, he had spoken to that photograph every morning, every night. He walked over slowly. His fingers rested lightly against the wooden frame. I kept my promise, he whispered. I protected the ranch. His voice trembled. I protected Lily. He swallowed hard. But somewhere along the way, I forgot something. Tears filled his eyes. I forgot that you always wanted us to keep living. The room remained silent. Yet somehow, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful, as though the answer had always been there. He smiled through tears. Thank you. Then he turned. grabbed his truck keys, and ran. Outside, Claire started the engine. The familiar sound echoed across the quiet yard. She adjusted the rearview mirror one last time. The farmhouse reflected behind her. She whispered softly, "Goodbye." Before she could shift into reverse, she heard another engine. Fast. Very fast. Ethan's pickup truck burst from behind the equipment barn. It crossed the yard in a cloud of snow and gravel, before stopping sideways in front of the driveway. Claire stared in disbelief. The driver's door flew open. Ethan jumped out. Still wearing his work jacket, breathing hard, he hurried toward her car. Claire stepped outside. Ethan, he stopped several feet away, trying to catch his breath. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked completely unsure of himself. He tried again. "I almost let you leave." The Claire waited quietly. "I told myself it was the right thing. I told myself you deserved a better life. A bigger career. A bigger future." He laughed bitterly. "I've spent months convincing myself I was protecting you." He shook his head. "I wasn't. I was protecting myself." Claire's eyes filled with tears. Ethan knew. He gently interrupted. "I need to say this. For once, I'm not hiding behind paperwork, or promises, or fear." He took one slow step closer. "When Grace died, I honestly believed that part of my life ended with her. I loved her. I always will." Claire nodded quietly. "I know. I thought loving someone else would somehow erase what we had." He looked toward the snow-covered ranch. "I was wrong." His eyes found hers again. "Love doesn't replace love. It grows." Claire felt tears sliding down her cheeks. He continued. "I don't laugh because the ranch is doing better. I laugh because you're here. I don't drink coffee on the porch because I like coffee. I do it because you're sitting beside me. I don't look forward to sunsets because of the view. I look forward to them because I get to watch you with you." His voice cracked, somewhere between repairing fences, arguing with chickens, late-night paperwork, and dancing at the harvest festival. "I fell in love with you." Silence. Snow drifted softly around them. Claire couldn't speak. Ethan took another step. "I know this wasn't supposed to happen. I know this started as a contract, but it stopped being one a long time ago." He looked at the packed car. "I don't want you to stay because of the ranch. I don't want you to stay because of Lily. I don't even want you to stay because you feel sorry for me." He smiled through tears. "I want you to stay because—" He took a deep breath. "I love you." The words hung in the cold winter air. Honest. Completely unplanned. Exactly what they should have been. Claire laughed softly through her tears. "You really picked the most dramatic possible moment." Ethan blinked. "What?" She wiped her eyes. "I've been waiting weeks for you to say that." Now it was Ethan's turn to stare. "You?" She nodded. "I love you too. I've loved you for longer than I wanted to admit." She looked toward the farmhouse. "I kept packing boxes, hoping you'd stop me." He smiled helplessly. "I almost didn't." "I know." The Claire walked toward him. "When Daniel offered me everything I thought I'd ever wanted, I realized something." "What?" "I wasn't comparing two jobs. I was comparing two lives." She reached for his hands. "I chose this one. I chose this ranch." She looked into his eyes. "I chose you." For several seconds, neither moved, neither spoke. Then Ethan gently wrapped his arms around her. Claire hugged him back, not awkwardly, not cautiously. Like two people who had spent months pretending not to need exactly this moment. The cold no longer mattered. Neither did the snow, or the waiting, or the contract. Only this. A familiar voice interrupted them. "I knew it." They turned. Lily stood on the farmhouse porch wearing her winter coat. Martha stood beside her. Samuel leaned against the porch railing, trying very hard not to smile. Richard Lawson quietly removed his glasses to wipe away suspiciously emotional eyes. Lily ran across the snowy yard. She threw her arms around both Claire and Ethan at the same time. "I told you!" She laughed through happy tears. "I told you to tell her!" Ethan laughed. "You were right." "I know." Lily looked at Claire. "So, you're not leaving?" Claire smiled warmly. "No, I'm staying." Lily hugged her even tighter. "Good?" "I didn't want to draw another family picture." Everyone laughed. A few minutes later, they all gathered inside the warm farmhouse. Richard looked toward the unsigned paperwork still lying on the dining table. He smiled. "I suppose these won't be necessary." Claire looked at Ethan. He reached for the papers. Without a word, he folded them in half. Then again. Finally, he placed them back inside the envelope. Not signed. Not needed. The agreement that had brought them together had finally served its purpose. It had saved the ranch. But far more importantly, it had given two broken hearts the chance to find each other. Outside, snow continued falling gently across Walker Ranch. Inside, for the first time since Grace's passing, the farmhouse no longer felt like a place filled with memories of what had been lost. It felt like a home preparing for everything still waiting to come. The first morning after Ethan confessed his love felt wonderfully ordinary. Claire woke before sunrise. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything that had happened the day before. Then she remembered. The packed suitcases still sat near the front door, the goodbye that never happened, the snowy embrace in the driveway, the words neither of them had been brave enough to say for months. She smiled into her pillow. Somehow, the entire world felt lighter. She walked downstairs expecting to be the first one awake. Instead, she found Ethan standing in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker. "What are you doing?" He looked over his shoulder. "I'm trying to decide something." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." "It is." He pointed toward two coffee mugs. "For nearly a year, I've made coffee because it became our routine." He smiled. "This morning, I'm making coffee because I get to." Claire laughed softly. "I think that's an excellent reason." He poured two mugs and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away immediately. For months, even the smallest touch had been something both carefully avoided. Now, it felt perfectly natural. They carried their coffee onto the porch. Fresh snow covered the ranch. The rising sun painted the fields in shades of gold and pink. Claire wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "I almost left." Ethan nodded quietly. "I know. I keep thinking about it." "So do I." She looked toward the driveway where her packed car still waited. "It doesn't feel real. It feels like a dream." Ethan smiled. "The good kind. The very good kind." They sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Claire spoke. "We should talk." Ethan laughed nervously. "That sentence usually worries me." "It shouldn't." She turned toward him. "I don't want yesterday to become one emotional conversation that we never mention again." "I agree. We've spent too long pretending." He nodded. "No more pretending." Later that morning, Richard Lawson returned to the ranch. He stepped inside carrying another leather folder. Claire laughed the moment she saw him. "Please tell me that isn't more paperwork." Richard smiled. "Actually, it is." Ethan groaned dramatically. "I knew it." Richard placed the folder on the dining table. "I brought the documents for renewing the agreement." Claire looked toward Ethan, then back at Richard. "We won't be needing those." Richard smiled knowingly. "I suspected as much." He slowly removed another folder. "This one is different." Claire looked confused. "What is it?" Richard answered with a grin. "A marriage license application." Ethan blinked. "We're already married." Richard chuckled. "Legally, Wes. But if you intend to spend the rest of your lives together, I thought you might prefer a wedding that begins with love, instead of legal necessity." The room fell quiet. Claire looked toward Ethan. He smiled. I think I'd like that. She smiled back. So would I. Word traveled through Ashton Creek faster than anyone expected. By lunchtime, Samuel had already heard. Martha somehow knew. Before Samuel, by evening, half the town seemed aware that Ethan and Claire were planning a real wedding. The congratulations never stopped. Samuel walked into the barn carrying a toolbox. I hear you're getting married. Ethan laughed. I've technically been married for almost a year. You know exactly what I mean. Samuel shook his head with a grin. Took you long enough. It did. What changed? Ethan thought carefully. I finally stopped being afraid. Samuel nodded. That's usually the hardest part. Meanwhile, Claire accompanied Martha into town to choose a dress. Nothing extravagant. Nothing expensive. Claire insisted on keeping everything simple. Martha looked at one elegant white dress hanging near the window. What about this one? Claire smiled. I wore white the first time. You did. But it didn't feel like a wedding. Martha gently touched the fabric. Then maybe this time, it will. Claire quietly stepped into the fitting room. Several minutes later, she emerged wearing the dress. It wasn't elaborate. Simple lace sleeves. Soft flowing fabric. Elegant without trying too hard. Martha covered her mouth. Oh. Claire looked uncertain. Is it too much? Martha shook her head. None. It's exactly right. Claire turned toward the mirror. For the first time, she wasn't looking at someone pretending to be a bride. She was looking at one. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday, exactly 1 week after Claire had almost driven away. The entire town volunteered to help. Again, Samuel built a beautiful wooden arch overlooking the western pasture. Neighbors decorated it with evergreen branches and winter flowers. Children strung lights through the oak trees. Martha organized food for nearly 100 guests. Richard somehow agreed to coordinate everything despite repeatedly insisting he wasn't an event planner. Claire laughed every time she saw someone carrying decorations. We're having a much bigger wedding than I expected. Ethan looked around the busy ranch. I think everyone feels like they helped write this story. They kinda did. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Fresh snow sparkled across the fields. Not enough to make travel difficult. Just enough to make everything beautiful. Claire stood in the farmhouse bedroom, fastening the final button on her dress. She looked at herself in the mirror. 1 year earlier, she had stood in front of another mirror preparing for another wedding. That day, she had been calm, practical, emotionally distant. Today, her hands trembled. Not from fear, from happiness. A gentle knock sounded. Come in. Martha entered carrying a small wooden box. I found something. Claire looked inside. Grace's handmade wooden angel. The Christmas ornament. Martha nodded. Grace believed every bride should carry something that reminded her that love isn't about perfection. Claire carefully held the tiny carving. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. Martha smiled warmly. She would have wanted you to have it. Claire felt tears filling her eyes. I promise I'll take care of him. Martha quietly hugged her. I know you will. Outside, guests filled rows of wooden chairs overlooking the ranch. Soft music drifted across the winter air. Samuel stood beside Ethan adjusting his tie. You nervous? Ethan laughed, terrified. Go. Good. That means this one matters. Richard stepped forward. I think we're ready. Ethan looked toward the farmhouse. The front door opened. Claire appeared. Every conversation stopped. She slowly walked toward him. The winter sunlight caught the lace of her dress. The gentle breeze moved a few loose strands of hair across her face. Ethan forgot how to breathe. Samuel quietly whispered, You'd better close your mouth. Ethan laughed without taking his eyes off Claire. I can't. Claire reached the front. She smiled. So. Ethan smiled back. You look beautiful. You've already said that twice. I know. I'm saying it again. The guests laughed softly. The minister smiled. I believe we have a wedding to begin. This time, the vows weren't read from a legal agreement. They came from the heart. Ethan looked into Claire's eyes. I promised once to protect a ranch. Today, I promise to protect the life we're building together. Claire smiled through tears. I came here believing I was saving your future. I never imagined you'd save mine. I promise to choose you every single day, not because I have to, because I want to. When the minister finally smiled, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The crowd laughed warmly. Samuel called out from the front row. You've been waiting a year to say that. Everyone laughed again. Ethan gently cupped Claire's face, then kissed her. Not hurriedly. Not dramatically. Just long enough to tell her everything words no longer needed to say. Applause echoed across Walker Ranch. Lily ran forward first. She hugged both of them at once. I finally get my real family picture. Claire laughed through happy tears. I think you do. As everyone celebrated beneath the winter sky, Claire looked across the ranch. The barn, the fields, the old oak tree, the farmhouse. 1 year earlier, she had married a stranger to save a ranch. Today, she married the love of her life. For the very first time, for all the right reasons. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Snow melted into streams that wound through the pastures. The fields turned green again. Birdsong replaced the quiet stillness of the colder months. Walker Ranch felt as though it had taken its first deep breath in years. Claire stood on the porch one morning with a notebook in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. She smiled as Ethan walked toward her from the barn. You've been making lists again. She looked up innocently. I've always made lists. Should I be worried? Only if you're afraid of succeeding. He laughed. I don't think I've ever heard those words together. She handed him the notebook. Across the top of the page she had written, For Walker Ranch 5-year growth plan. Ethan stared at it. I thought we were just trying to survive. Claire smiled. We were. She pointed toward the title. Now we're building. The bank restructuring had changed everything. Monthly payments had become manageable. The emergency grants Richard helped secure had arrived. Several unnecessary loans had been consolidated into a single agricultural recovery program. For the first time in nearly a decade, Walker Ranch was operating at a profit. Not a huge one, but enough. Enough to repair equipment before it broke. Enough to replace aging fencing. Enough to stop living in constant fear of the mailbox. Ethan noticed something he hadn't felt in years. He no longer dreaded opening letters. One afternoon, Claire spread several blueprints across the dining room table. Ethan leaned over them. What am I looking at? A new equipment shed. He blinked. A new one. The old shed costs more to repair every year than it would to replace. She pointed to another drawing. And this, is a renovated feed storage building. Ethan smiled. I love that you think 3 years ahead. Claire looked at him. I've learned something. What? When you're always trying to survive, you stop planning. He nodded slowly. I did. I know. She gently touched his hand. But we don't have to anymore. Construction began 2 weeks later. Instead of hiring a large contractor, the community once again showed up. Samuel organized the volunteers. Martha coordinated meals. Richard somehow found discounted building materials through one of his clients. Claire looked around the busy ranch in amazement. I still can't believe people keep doing this. Samuel laughed while lifting a heavy beam. You'll stop being surprised eventually. I hope not. He smiled. I guess that's a good answer. By early summer, the new equipment shed stood proudly beside the main barn. Fresh red paint matched the original buildings. Modern solar panels lined the roof. Rainwater collection tanks sat neatly beside the structure. Claire proudly walked Ethan through the finished building. What do you think? He slowly turned in a circle. I think, he looked at her. I've never owned anything this organized. She laughed. I'll accept that as a compliment. It absolutely is. He gently wrapped one arm around her shoulders. You've changed this place. Claire shook her head. No. We changed it. The improvements didn't go unnoticed. Neighboring ranchers began visiting Walker Ranch asking for advice. Some wanted help applying for grants. Others needed assistance organizing finances. A few simply wanted to understand how Ethan had managed to turn things around. One afternoon, a young rancher named Ben stood awkwardly in the office doorway. I was told. He hesitated. You might be willing to help. Claire smiled warmly. Come in. He removed his hat. I'm about 6 months from losing everything. Ethan quietly pulled out another chair. Sit down. They've been there. For nearly 3 hours, the three of them reviewed Ben's finances. Claire found unnecessary expenses, missed tax credits, agricultural programs he qualified for but had never heard about. When they finished, Ben stared at the notes in disbelief. I actually have a chance. Claire smiled. You always did. You just couldn't see it. After he left, Ethan leaned back in his chair. You know? What? A year ago, that was us. Claire looked toward the empty doorway. I know. And now we're the ones helping. She smiled softly. That's my favorite kind of success. Summer brought another harvest festival. This year, Walker Ranch wasn't struggling to fill a single booth. Instead, they sponsored one of the largest displays in the entire square. Fresh vegetables, homemade jams, local honey, fresh flowers, baked goods, even handcrafted wooden decorations made from reclaimed barn wood. Lily proudly stood behind the table greeting customers. Welcome to Walker Ranch? Claire laughed. I think she's better at this than I am. Ethan smiled. She definitely gets that from you. Claire looked surprised. Mem, you've taught her how to talk to everyone. Lily waved excitedly at another family approaching the booth. Claire watched with quiet pride. The shy little girl who had once worried about once were another parent now, laughed freely with complete strangers. Healing had found Lily too. That afternoon, the mayor approached the Walker Ranch booth. He shook Ethan's hand firmly. I've got a favor to ask. Ethan smiled. What is it? We're creating a mentorship program for young farmers. He looked toward Claire. We'd like both of you to lead it. The Claire blinked. Oos. The mayor nodded. You've become an example. Not because everything was easy, but because you refused to give up. Ethan looked Claire. She smiled. I think we should. He laughed. I knew you were going to say that. Several weeks later, the first workshop took place inside the newly renovated equipment shed. Nearly 30 struggling farmers attended. Some were barely out of college. Others had farmed for decades. Claire spoke about financial planning, grant applications, managing debt before it became overwhelming. Ethan spoke about resilience, community, learning to ask for help before it was too late. When the presentation ended, one older rancher quietly approached Ethan. I almost sold my family's land last year. Ethan nodded. I almost did too. The man smiled. I think I'll fight a little longer. Ethan shook his hand. So will we. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Claire and Ethan sat together on the porch. The sunset painted the fields in deep shades of orange and gold. Claire leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. You remember the first time we sat here? He smiled. You barely knew me? I thought you were impossibly quiet. I was. You still are. I know. She laughed. But now I understand your silence. He looked toward the fields. And what's that? It was never emptiness. It was grief. He gently kissed the top of her head. Thank you. For what? For waiting. But Claire smiled. I wasn't waiting. I was walking beside you. They watched the last sunlight disappear beyond the hills. The ranch no longer looked like a place fighting to survive. Fresh fences stretched across healthy pastures. The restored barns stood proudly beneath the evening sky. New equipment gleamed beside the workshop. Cattle grazed peacefully across green fields. Walker Ranch had been saved. Not by luck, not by a miracle, but by honesty, hard work, a community that refused to abandon one of its own, and two people who had discovered that sometimes the strongest foundation wasn't poured from concrete, it was built from trust. One quiet sunrise, one repaired fence, one shared cup of coffee at a time. Nearly a year had passed since Ethan and Claire exchanged their real wedding vows. Walker Ranch no longer looked like the struggling property Claire had first driven onto. The paint on the barns was fresh. The fences stood straight. New calves wandered beside their mothers across healthy green pastures. The farmhouse windows glowed warmly every evening. It felt lived in, loved. Home. Claire stood in the kitchen one Saturday morning, rolling pie dough across the counter. She frowned at the uneven circle. "I don't understand." Martha looked over from the sink. "What now?" "It keeps becoming the shape of Texas." Martha laughed. "That's better than my first pie." "What shape was yours?" "I don't think geography has a name for it." Both women burst into laughter. Lily walked into the kitchen carrying a bowl of apples. "Are we making pie again?" Claire smiled. "We're attempting pie. There's an important difference." Lily carefully placed the apples on the counter. "I think it'll taste good." Claire looked at the crooked dough. "I appreciate your optimism." Outside, Samuel found Ethan repairing the porch swing. "You know," Samuel said, "you've been fixing that swing for an hour." Ethan tightened another bolt. "It squeaks. It squeaked 5 minutes ago. It still squeaks." Samuel folded his arms. "I think you're just avoiding going inside." Ethan smiled. "3 generations of Lawson women are taking over my kitchen." Samuel laughed. "Smart man." The two old friends sat on the porch steps. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Samuel looked toward the fields. "You remember the day Richard brought you that marriage proposal?" Ethan nodded. "I remember thinking it sounded completely impossible. And now?" Ethan watched Claire through the kitchen window. She was laughing with Martha while flour somehow ended up on Lily's nose. "It feels like the most natural thing in the world." Samuel smiled. "I thought so." That afternoon, Walker Ranch welcomed visitors from neighboring counties. The mentorship program had grown far beyond what anyone expected. Young couples, retired ranchers, families hoping to keep their land. Everyone gathered inside the renovated equipment shed. Claire stood beside a whiteboard covered with charts. "When people hear the word budget," she smiled, "they usually imagine restrictions." Several people nodded. "I see something different." "What?" one young farmer asked. "Freedom." The room grew quiet. Claire continued. "When you know where your money is going, you stop making decisions based on fear. You start making decisions based on purpose." She glanced toward Ethan. "And purpose changes everything." When she finished speaking, the audience applauded warmly. Ethan stepped forward next. "I can't teach you how to predict the weather." Several people laughed. "I still haven't figured that one out. But I can tell you this. The strongest ranches aren't built by one person. They're built by families, neighbors, communities, and by having the courage to admit when you need help." The applause lasted even longer. Afterward, a young couple approached them. The husband nervously removed his cap. "We were thinking about giving up." His wife nodded. "But after today, we're going to keep fighting." Claire smiled warmly. "I think that's the right decision." As they walked away, Ethan quietly whispered, "You've started something much bigger than a financial plan." Claire looked around the busy workshop. "So have you." That evening, Lily carried another sketchbook onto the porch. Claire immediately recognized it. The famous notebook. Lily grinned. I finished it. She climbed onto the porch swing between Ethan and Claire. Want to see? Always. Lily carefully turned page after page. There were drawings of calves, the old red barn, the harvest festival, the Christmas tree with colorful lights, the storm that nearly destroyed the north barn, the wedding beneath the wooden arch. Every important moment of the past year had somehow found its way onto paper. Finally, she reached the last page. Claire felt tears gathering instantly. The picture showed the farmhouse at sunset. Ethan stood on one side, Claire on the other, Lily between them, 3 smiling faces. Above the house, she had drawn a simple wooden sign. Claire looked toward Lily. This is beautiful. Lily shrugged. I wanted to draw the ending. Claire smiled gently. I don't think it's the ending. Lily looked curious. No. Claire closed the sketchbook carefully. I think it's the beginning. Lily smiled. I like beginnings better. A few days later, Richard Lawson visited the ranch carrying another envelope. Ethan laughed as soon as he saw him. If that's more paperwork, I'm hiding. Richard smiled. This time, it's good paperwork. Claire accepted the envelope. Inside was an official notice. Walker Ranch had successfully completed every requirement of its financial recovery agreement. The final restrictions had been removed. The ranch now operated completely under Ethan and Claire's ownership without special oversight. Claire read the letter twice, then handed it to Ethan. He quietly looked at the final paragraph. He smiled. We did it. Claire shook her head. We all did. Richard nodded. That's the truth. He looked around the property. I've practiced law in this county for 32 years. I've seen businesses fail. I've seen families lose everything. But I've never seen a recovery quite like this. Claire laughed softly. It wasn't exactly conventional. Richard smiled. The best stories rarely are. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and Claire walked toward the old oak tree. The swing still hung beneath its sturdy branches. The bench overlooking the western pasture remained exactly where Ethan had built it years ago. Claire sat quietly beside him. You still come here. I always will. She nodded. I understand. He looked toward Grace's memorial bench. I used to come here because I was lonely. He reached for Claire's hand. Now I come here because I'm grateful. They watched the sun slowly disappear beyond the hills. The same sunset Grace had loved. The same sunset Claire had grown to love. Different chapters. Different seasons. The same beautiful view. Claire rested her head gently against Ethan's shoulder. Do you know something? What? If someone told me 2 years ago, I'd end up living on a ranch, making pies, teaching farmers, and arguing with chickens, I would have laughed. Ethan smiled. You still argue with the chickens. They started. He laughed. I believe you. Their laughter drifted softly across the fields. It mixed with the evening breeze, with the distant sound of cattle, with the comforting rhythm of a ranch finally at peace. Walker Ranch had become more than saved land. It had become proof that sometimes life doesn't fall apart to punish you. Sometimes it falls apart just enough to make room for something better, something stronger, something that finally feels like home. 5 years later, the sunrise over Walker Ranch still arrived exactly the way Claire loved it. Golden light rolled across the hills. Morning mist hovered above the creek. The cattle slowly wandered toward fresh pasture. Birds filled the air with familiar songs. Some things had changed dramatically. Others never needed to. Claire stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She smiled before she even reached the rocking chairs. Ethan was already there, just as he was every morning, looking across the fields. You beat me. He accepted the mug with a grin. Only by 3 minutes. You've been getting competitive. You started it. Claire laughed. I probably did. They clinked their coffee mugs together before taking the first sip. It had become their quiet little tradition, one neither of them ever wanted to lose. Walker Ranch had become one of the most successful family ranches in the county. Not the largest, not the richest, but certainly one of the most respected. Their mentorship program had expanded across 3 neighboring counties. Every spring, dozens of young ranching families gathered at Walker Ranch to learn about financial planning, sustainable farming, and building stronger communities. Claire's financial guides were now used by agricultural organizations throughout the state. Ethan had become known as the rancher who never refused to help someone in trouble. Whenever people thanked them, they always gave the same answer. We didn't build this alone. Because it was true. No one ever did. The farmhouse had changed too. Fresh paint covered the walls. A larger dining table filled the kitchen. The old office where Claire had once buried herself beneath paperwork had become a shared workspace. Shelves held neatly labeled binders beside framed family photographs. Pictures from the Harvest Festival, Christmas mornings, community events, wedding anniversaries. One photograph always made visitors smile. The picture of Claire standing in the chicken coop while an angry hen chased her toward the gate. Lily had insisted it deserved a frame. Claire still argued otherwise. She never won. Lily was no longer the quiet little girl who had clung to Ethan's hand. She had grown into a confident young woman preparing to leave for college. She planned to study agricultural business. Claire couldn't have looked prouder. One warm summer evening, Lily spread university brochures across the dining table. I got accepted. Claire immediately hugged her. I knew you would. Ethan smiled. We're incredibly proud of you. Lily looked at both of them. I couldn't have done it without you. Claire shook her head. You did the hard work. Lily laughed. You've been saying that since elementary school. Because it's true. After a moment, Lily quietly added, You know, I used to be afraid of losing another parent. The room fell silent. She smiled warmly. I don't worry anymore. Claire reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You'll always have us. Always. Lily nodded. I know. And she truly did. A few weeks later, Walker Ranch hosted its annual community picnic. Nearly the entire town attended. Children raced through the fields. Neighbors filled long picnic tables with homemade food. Samuel stood proudly beside a new generation of young ranchers he had helped mentor. Martha laughed as she judged the pie contest for what she claimed would be her final year. Everyone knew she'd say the same thing next year. Richard Lawson wandered through the crowd accepting grateful handshakes from families whose farms had survived because he refused to give up on them. Claire quietly watched everything from the porch. Ethan walked over carrying 2 slices of pie. You've been standing here for 10 minutes. I know. What are you thinking? She looked across the ranch. I'm remembering. The first day. She nodded. I thought I was coming here to solve a business problem. And now, she smiled. I can't imagine my life anywhere else. As evening approached, the community slowly gathered beneath the old oak tree, the same tree that had witnessed grief, hope, healing, and new beginnings. Samuel stood and gently tapped his glass. I've known Ethan almost my entire life. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I've watched this ranch survive droughts, storms, and more stubborn cattle than I can count. The more laughter followed. But the greatest thing I've ever seen happen here, he smiled toward Claire, was watching 2 people save each other while they thought they were only saving a ranch. The applause lasted a long time. Claire looked toward Ethan. He quietly reached for her hand, just as naturally as breathing. After the last guests had gone home, the ranch settled into peaceful silence once again. Fireflies drifted above the pasture. Crickets filled the warm summer night. Claire and Ethan walked toward the familiar wooden bench overlooking the western fields. Grace's memorial plaque remained exactly where it had always been. Claire gently brushed away a few fallen leaves. Ethan sat beside her. "You still come here?" She smiled. "I always will." He looked toward the sunset. "I used to think this bench represented everything I'd lost." The Claire rested her head against his shoulder. "And now?" He looked across the fields stretching toward the horizon. "Now it reminds me that love doesn't end. It grows. It changes. It makes room." The Claire smiled. "I think Grace would like that. I think she would too." They sat together as the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. The ranch was quiet, healthy, full of life, exactly as generations before them had dreamed it would be. Claire looked toward the farmhouse glowing warmly in the distance. "Do you ever think about that contract?" Ethan laughed softly. "Sometimes." "What do you think?" He smiled. "I think it was the smartest bad idea anyone ever had." Claire laughed. "I'll agree with that." He gently kissed her forehead. "You know." "Huh? What?" "You saved my ranch." She shook her head. "No. I married a widowed farmer because I thought I was rescuing his future." She intertwined her fingers with his. "But somewhere between sunrise coffees, storms, harvest festivals, and one very angry chicken," she smiled through happy tears, "you healed my broken heart." Ethan looked at the woman who had transformed his life in ways no contract ever could. "I think we healed each other." The stars slowly appeared above Walker Ranch, the same stars that had watched over generations of the Walker family, the same stars that had witnessed sorrow, perseverance, and hope. This time, they watched something else, a home filled with laughter, a family built by choice, a ranch that would remain in loving hands for generations to come. Some stories end with a wedding, others end with a kiss, but the most meaningful stories end with two people waking up every morning, choosing each other, again and again. And that was exactly how the story of Walker Ranch continued. Not as a contract, not as an obligation, but as a promise kept every single day. If this story touched your heart, let me know by leaving a like. I'd also love to hear which moment affected you the most. The wedding of convenience, the storm, Lily's heartfelt plea, or Ethan finally telling Claire how he felt. If you enjoy stories about second chances, family, and finding love when you least expect it, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story.